Chapter 350. In a short period of time, Renbochin poured out a chain of bullets at the enemy, turning many of the great Xia generals who were overlooking into the distance into a pile of mosaics. Previously, when Renbochin was more than 700 meters away, he didn't fire again and let the 100 great Xia soldiers run back. Everyone thought that Renbochin's shooting range was limited to this. After all, with the strength of the soldiers in this world, even if the great Xia soldiers were much stronger than the soldiers on Earth, they could only shoot at a distance of 300 to 400 steps with a longbow. Crossbow bolts only had a shooting range of about 100 steps, and the giant ballistae that guarded the city had a shooting range of 800 to 1,000 steps. The thunder cannon that Great Xia had just developed could reach a shooting range of 1,400 steps and was already regarded as a siege weapon. The weapon in Renbochin's hands was so powerful that it was far better than a crossbow, and its attack speed was unbelievable. A shooting range of 1,400 steps was already extremely shocking. Many of the great Xia generals were observing from a distance of 1 kilometer, which was 2,000 steps away. They were thinking about how to break into the stronghold, snatch the weapons from the enemy's hands, and send them back to the imperial court. However, they were all wiped out by Renbochin. The great Xia army was in a state of chaos, especially the guards. In Great Xia, if the generals died and the guards were fine, the guards would be executed. Therefore, as long as the general died, the guards would definitely be killed. The guards were usually treated much better than ordinary soldiers, but they were bound together by the general's rise and fall. As a result, they were usually extremely loyal. Even if they died, the general would still take care of their family members and provide financial compensation. However, if the general died, the guards wouldn't be able to live either. At this moment, the captain and a few captains were wiped out, and the guards were all stunned. Following which, they bellowed that they wanted to avenge the captain. The chaos spread from the front to the back of the army. Renbochin used his binoculars to see that the enemy's army was in chaos. First, some people shouted something, and then nearly 1/3 of the army rushed toward the stronghold. Even the cannons that were being driven by the carriages were brought up by them. The others were at a loss and didn't know what to do. Very brave. Renbochin was in awe. It was better for such a brave enemy to die. However, he didn't know that by wiping out those people just now, he had killed many of them. This great Xia army was actually a regiment with a total of 4,600 soldiers in 5 battalions. According to military strength, it was equivalent to a military headquarters. Among them, from the highest-ranking commandant to the commandant of each battalion, there were at least a few hundred bodyguards. In addition to those who had been incited, there were more than 1,000 people rushing over. Renbochin unhurriedly used the scope to take aim at the people one by one. On the battlefield, some of the people who were running around suddenly lost a section of their body or broke into 2. Then, they bounced up some dust on the ground near them. Such a scene was terrifying, but it also made them even crazier. However, their craziness was only rewarded with faster shooting by Renbochin. Occasionally, there were a few soldiers who slipped through the net, but he didn't bother about them. There were so many guards around, and 50 Earth will level guards were enough to kill these great Xia soldiers. Therefore, after killing and shooting half of the great Xia soldiers, he no longer paid any attention to them. He gave an order to the guards beside him, and the guards in the stronghold jumped down from the wall, drew their steel swords, and faced the heroic great Xia soldiers. Battle cries immediately rang out from the surroundings. Some of the villagers in the stronghold were envious. They simply picked up their clubs and rushed out. Halfway through, they threw their clubs away and went to the ground to pick up their weapons. They carried a bundle of spears that were scattered on the ground back to the stronghold. When they returned, they would look for a blacksmith to smelt the spear tips and forge them into long swords. All of them were smiling like sunflowers. He only used the scope to look at the desperate soldiers who were stuffing explosives into the cannons. After seeing them stuffing a stone shell into the cannon, Renbochin opened fire and killed those soldiers. He didn't need them to light the fire as he could do it himself. Renbochin fired a machine gun at those great Xia soldiers who didn't know whether to advance or retreat. This was much more effective than serving tea and seeing them off. The battle outside the stronghold was also coming to an end. Shi Hu and the other guards were covered in blood. They kicked the corpses that were blocking their way to the side, hugged their arms, and looked at the fleeing great Xia soldiers with a heroic look on their faces. Renbochin left the spear there and asked someone to call Shi Hu back to look at his precious spear. He then brought Lin Chaola and a few guards to check on the two cannons. By the time he reached the place where he had fallen, the great Xia soldiers were already nowhere to be seen. "Sir, do you know what this is?" a few guards asked curiously when they saw Renbochin hurriedly looking at the iron pipe. "Cannons." Renbochin replied casually and examined it carefully. The cannon looked a little ugly. It had a flared mouth at the front and a rather thick belly at the back. Renbochin didn't know the purpose of this design. It was about 1.6 meters long, completely made of iron, and had a dark body. It was estimated to weigh more than 500 kilograms. Without weighing it, Renbochin didn't know the specifics. He took out the stone shell and found that it had a diameter of about 110 millimeters. After stuffing the stone shell back into the cannon, Renbochin found a direction. He held a pair of binoculars in one hand and ignited the cannon with the other. He was ready to see how far this cannon could shoot. Boom! The body of the cannon shook violently. Even the cannon and its wheels were pushed back by the recoil. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. However, the smell of gunpowder wasn't quite the same as when Renbochin fired the gun. There was actually a little peach smell, which made Renbochin feel a little baffled. Only God knew what the great Xia people added to the gunpowder. "Go, find out where the shell was shot to. If you can find any traces, that will do." Renbochin pointed to the front. More than a dozen guards seemed to have broken free from their reins, and ran out. "This seems to be similar to yours," Lin Chaola asked. "Much worse." Renbochin had a look of disdain on his face. "How dare you compare my precious spear to this thing?" Even though there wasn't much of a difference in theory, in reality, there was a difference of at least a few hundred years of development. If Great Xia was allowed to research cannons, it was hard to say whether they could reach the modern stage in another 1,000 years. By that time, Dayo would probably be able to use the Star Destroyer cannon. Very soon, those guards found the traces of the falling stone. Renbochin followed them to take a look. He calculated in his heart that it was about 1,200 steps, which was about 600 meters. He reckoned that this thing couldn't exceed 800 meters at most. Even though it wasn't much in Renbochin's eyes, it was already considered pretty good in this era. After all, the catapult had a range of about 400 steps, which was equivalent to 200 meters. Furthermore, the catapult was clumsier and required more manpower when it was used. This thing only needed a few people. Even though the power of this thing wasn't very great and it was impossible to use it to destroy a fortified city, it was extremely easy to use it to attack a stronghold in the wilderness. That kind of stronghold with wooden fences was completely unable to block this kind of stone shell. Furthermore, the stone shell had already been invented. Presumably, Great Xia would soon discover that the iron shell was more powerful. Perhaps Great Xia had already discovered it, but for some reason, they hadn't used it yet. By the time Renbochin got the guards to bring the two cannons back to the stronghold, the other weapons had already been collected by the villagers. "Sir." The villagers held a few long sabers in both hands and gave them to Renbochin. "This isn't bad." Renbochin picked the prettiest one from the bunch. It was quite heavy and weighed at least 10 kilograms. Renbochin casually twirled the saber, and the face of the guard beside him turned green. He watched as the tip of the saber whizzed through the air in front of his eyes. Goosebumps appeared all over his body, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly retreated a few meters away. He made up his mind that if Rinpoche was holding a weapon, he would never approach him again. "Sir, what should we do with these weapons?" the guard asked. The villagers looked at Rinpoche anxiously. These spears had become treasures in their eyes. The spearheads of about 2,000 spears were enough to forge 100 long sabers. To these villagers, this was a huge sum of money. "They are all yours." Rinpoche could tell what they were thinking and waved his hand. In the past, Dayo lacked iron, but now, it wasn't so much. Furthermore, as time passed, the number of weapons in Dayo would increase. In another year, these iron weapons wouldn't be so unattainable to these villagers. "Thank you, sir." The villagers were ecstatic upon hearing this. "Send this to the nearest town and ask them to send someone to deliver it to the Ministry of Works." "I will write a letter in a while," Rinpoche said to the villagers while pointing at the cannon. "Yes, sir." After receiving the spears, the villagers looked at Rinpoche cordially. Not to mention that Rinpoche had saved their village previously. They naturally agreed to such a small matter. Rinpoche then turned on the radio station and found that Shurching was online. He felt that Shurching was doing nothing but guarding the radio station every day, just like a customer service agent for Taobao. Rinpoche told him about what happened here, and Shurching was shocked. Rinpoche actually encountered the Great Xia army again. This news was simply frightening. "Sir Ren, can you stop scaring us? If anything happens to you, Her Majesty will definitely go crazy." Shurching couldn't help but tactfully say, "Sir Ren, as long as you are safe and don't run around, that will be the greatest help to the current war. As for the matter of intercepting the Great Xia army, there are tens of thousands of Aboriginal warriors, so you don't have to worry about it." However, the news that Rinpoche received next made him feel a little incredulous. He led dozens of guards to repel thousands of Great Xia soldiers, and he wasn't injured at all. How was this possible? 1 against 100, even if they were Earth Will level guards, they would probably suffer heavy casualties, right? After all, the Great Xia army wasn't made of clay. Rinpoche didn't explain too much and only asked them to quickly inform all the villages in the north of Lan City to immediately bring their rations back to the nearby towns and burn everything else. After that, he wrote a letter to the villagers and got the guards to pack up and get ready to set off. 2,000 people had died outside the village, and the land next year would presumably be very fertile. It was a pity that these villagers had to hide in the town. Presumably, the weeds here would be extremely lush in a few months. After Rinpoche left, the villagers brought 2,000 spears to the town. The story of the Empress's husband, Sir Ren, killing 2,000 Great Xia soldiers with a strange weapon began to spread in the town. Subsequently, it became 5,000, 8,000, and 20,000. Chapter 351. Sir, they are scouts from Great Xia. When Rinpoche was still half a day away from Liao City, he could see Great Xia scouts sizing them up from afar. When they were about 500 to 600 meters away, they turned their horses around and left. "Pay attention at all times," Rinpoche said while caressing the machine gun on the fork-horned cow. "Wake up the one who is still sleeping and untie her." Now, Rinpoche was starting to doubt whether Lin Chaola was protecting him or him. Along the way, Lin Chaola basically tied a rope to the fork-horned cow to sleep. It seemed that this was the most important and happiest thing for her. Following which, everyone raised their vigilance to prevent the Great Xia soldiers from suddenly charging over and surrounding them. When they were still a few kilometers away from Liao City, Rinpoche could already see the city gate open. A group of goat riders came bouncing out of Liao City and welcomed Rinpoche's team. At this moment, Rinpoche could already see the Great Xia barracks in the distance. It was just outside the east gate of Liao City. Yesterday, the reinforcements from Great Xia arrived. Just as Rinpochen had expected, there were only 100,000 of them. They joined up with the 70,000 soldiers from before and once again surrounded the east, west, and north gates of Liao City. They didn't care about those who were heading south. It seemed like they were going all out to isolate Tiesua Pass and Shun City from Dayo. However, it was hard to say what their intentions were. "How's the situation in the city?" Rinpochen asked the winged cavalry. "Everything is normal." The winged cavalry didn't look too serious. Even though 170,000 Great Xia soldiers were outside the city, they weren't too nervous. Rinpochen nodded. He looked up at the red dot on the city gate tower and felt a little excited. However, before everyone reached the city gate, they heard the sound of cannons coming from afar. Then, there was an earth-shattering battle cry. "Are they attacking the city?" Rinpochen immediately reacted. In the morning, when he contacted the Empress through the radio station, he didn't hear any news of the Great Xia army attacking the city. It seemed like the Great Xia army was ready. "Enter the city." Rinpochen looked up and saw that the figure on the city wall had already disappeared. Everyone urged their oxen to gallop while being protected by a group of goat riders. Even though they had seen this many times and there were battle cries coming from afar, Rinpochen still couldn't help but laugh at such a grim situation. Damn, it was too funny. Even the filmmakers wouldn't dare to make up such a story. A group of experts with sturdy physiques, as if they had come from a sheep village, sat down. They were Happy Goat, Lazy Goat, and Beautiful Goat. The murderous aura disappeared in an instant. The city gate wasn't closed from the beginning to the end, and no one came to stop Rinpochen and the others. It was only after everyone entered the city that the gate slowly closed. Although 3 sides had launched attacks on the city, the people in the city did not panic. However, many people walked out of their houses and stood on the streets, looking in the direction of the battle cries in the distance. All of them had fierce expressions. The defense of the city during the few days before the Empress's arrival had completely aroused the hot-bloodedness in the hearts of these commoners. Now that the Empress was still in the city, these commoners couldn't wait to go up the city and kill the enemy. When they saw Rinpochen and his entourage coming in, they took a few more glances at them. They sized up Rinpochen, who was in the crowd, and examined the husband that the Empress had chosen. The group arrived at the city commander's mansion. The city magistrate was the official in charge of the city and the surrounding villages. Dayo was considered vast but sparsely populated. There were a total of 175 cities and towns, including 93 cities and towns where the remnant citizens of the Han nation resided. In fact, there were only 82 Aboriginal cities and towns. Many Aboriginals who lived on the plains lived around the villages. Rinpochen jumped down from the 4-corned cow and hurriedly walked in. When he reached the main hall, he saw the Empress sitting on a chair with Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan standing behind her. Below her were some generals wearing leather armor. "Your Majesty!" Rinpochen stepped forward to greet her. The Empress let out a grunt in response. "Everyone, go ahead and do your own things. Li Chincho, follow me to the city wall to take a look," the Empress said faintly. Everyone glanced at Rinpochen and filed out. Rinpochen raised his head and looked at the person who stayed behind. He was a burly man who was 2 meters tall and looked like an iron tower. His entire body was bronze in color, and he looked fierce and intimidating. "You follow me as well?" The Empress pointed at Rinpochen. "Yes." Rinpochen didn't expect to see a reunion after a long separation. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. After greeting her, he followed the Empress up the city wall. "Principal Ren." Li Chincho grinned at Rinpochen, revealing a sinister smile that made people feel that it was more threatening than kind. Since the outbreak of the war, Rinpoche had done a lot of things, including the radio station that everyone used as a chat group. This was the first time that everyone knew that there was such a way to communicate, and they treated it like a treasure. There was also the salt, iron, weaponsmithing, and the proposal to strengthen the city wall and clear the fields and the militia. Rinpoche's importance in the hearts of the court officials had risen sharply. Li Chincho showed kindness to him as soon as they met. "Greetings, Sir Li." Rinpoche cupped his hands and smiled. Before they reached the city wall, they heard a whistling sound in the air, followed by the loud sound of a heavy object smashing against the city wall. Looking out from the top of the city wall, they saw a few catapults 200 meters away. There were 2 wooden planks on both sides of the catapults to block arrows. Rows of soldiers were carrying huge stones and loading them onto the catapults. From time to time, a few bone arrows would be shot over, and someone would groan and fall to the ground. Even though Great Xiao's cannons had a long range, their power was too small and couldn't deal with a fortified city. Even though the catapults had a short range, the stones they threw caused more damage to the city wall. When Rinpoche saw the Empress looking into the distance, he handed over the binoculars hanging in front of his chest and received a look of admiration. When he turned his head, he found that Li Qianqiu was looking into the distance with a pair of binoculars. He was the only one who was empty-handed. After a while, he took the binoculars from the Empress and looked into the distance. Behind the catapults were rows of solemn soldiers. The first row of soldiers held shiny silver shields, while the second row of soldiers held a huge box in their hands. The next 3 rows of soldiers were holding bows and arrows, and the soldiers at the back were pointing their spears into the sky like a dense forest. In the distance was a continuous stretch of barracks that seemed to have no boundaries. There were even rows of fences erected outside the barracks. Not long after, he put down the binoculars and took a deep breath. Even though he had seen an army before, he had never felt such an oppressive feeling. Sure enough, a quantitative change caused a qualitative change. There were at least 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers outside. When he looked through the binoculars just now, he saw that the other party was building some huge military equipment outside the barracks. It seemed like the catapults were just the appetizer. After looking through the binoculars, Li Qianqiu cupped his hands at the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, they are waiting for us to go out and destroy the equipment. The second row of the Great Xia army is the Godly Arms Battalion, followed by the archers. If we want to destroy those catapults, I'm afraid that many people will be injured." While they were talking, the catapults threw another round of huge stones. A few stones that weighed about half a ton smashed into the city wall one after another, causing the entire city wall to shake. It felt as if the city wall would collapse at any time. There were also 2 stones that went over the city wall and smashed into the city. A few houses near the city wall were immediately smashed into pieces. Fortunately, the people there had already been evacuated, so there were no casualties. The Empress stretched out her hand and said, "Give me the bow." Immediately, someone handed a longbow to the Empress. She nocked an arrow and shot it. One of the wooden beams on the catapult was immediately broken, but very quickly, a few soldiers went up to repair it with a piece of wood. "Your Majesty, we have to destroy at least half of it. Otherwise, they will be able to repair it very quickly," Li Qianqiu said. Following which, the 3 of them looked at the other 2 directions along the city wall, and it was almost the same. Only the south side of the city was unattacked. However, the Great Xia soldiers from the east and west sides had scattered a large area of caltrops near the south side. There was also a row of Godly Arms Battalion soldiers holding crossbows to prevent Dayo from launching a surprise attack from the south gate. "What do you think about those catapults?" the Empress casually asked while they were on the city wall. "This matter is simple. Your Majesty, let them experience it in a while," Rinpoche immediately replied. The Empress nodded her head. Chapter 352. Please wait a moment, Your Majesty. After descending the city wall, Rinpoche slipped into the city commander's residence and stroked his spear. Then, he carried another box out of the city commander's residence and asked the guards to help him carry it back to the vicinity of the city wall. The Empress and Li Qianqiu were waiting under the protection of a group of winged cavalry warriors. When they saw the guards carrying the box behind Rinpoche, they began to guess what was inside. Rinpoche asked the guard to open the box, revealing rows of black tubes. It wasn't big, only about the length of a palm and about an inch in diameter. Principal Ren, what is this? Li Qianqiu asked curiously as he picked up a stick and fiddled with it. Explosives. Rinpoche smiled. This batch of explosives was obtained from the place where he bought guns on Earth. It was divided into 2 layers. The middle layer contained 300 grams of TNT, and the outer layer contained gunpowder. When the gunpowder exploded, the TNT would detonate. Originally, this thing was prepared to be used for mining. There were 300 of them, and this box was half of them. In the end, he didn't use it at all. He had brought it with him when he left Lawn City, and it just so happened that he could use it now. Explosives. Li Qianqiu was puzzled. The Empress knew a little about explosives, but she didn't know how to use them. You will know in a while. After Rinpoche finished speaking, everyone went up the city wall again. Rinpoche squatted down and tied the explosives to a few long arrows. Then, he cut off a section of the fuse at the back of the explosives before looking up at Li Qianqiu and saying, Sir Li, I will have to trouble you to find someone to shoot this under the enemy's catapult later. Let me do it. Li Qianqiu said. In fact, to these aboriginal soldiers who had grown up hunting in the mountains, a distance of 200 meters wasn't something everyone could achieve. However, he also wanted to see what Rinpoche had come up with. Rinpoche had prepared a total of 22 catapults. The enemy only had a total of 20 catapults around Liao City. After he was ready, Rinpoche handed the bow and arrow to Li Qianqiu. Before Li Qianqiu could say anything, the bone arrow turned into a white line and pierced a catapult with a sharp sound. Rinpoche, Li Qianqiu had an expectant look on his face. 10 seconds later, he asked, Why isn't there any reaction? It hasn't been lit yet. Rinpoche was speechless. I forgot. Li Qianqiu laughed heartily. After laughing, he picked up another bone arrow and placed it on his bow. Rinpoche asked someone to bring a lit piece of wood to light the fuse and quickly said, All right, release. The fuse was still 10 centimeters long. Logically speaking, it should not be a problem for more than 10 seconds. However, he was afraid that something would go wrong with the fuse. If it was a quick shooter, then he would be in big trouble. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Qianqiu's fingers loosened, and the bone arrow once again pierced through the air, traversing a distance of 200 meters and nailing itself onto the catapult. Then, Li Qianqiu cast a probing look at Rinpoche. Wait! Rinpoche used a pair of binoculars to look in that direction. At this moment, he couldn't see clearly whether the fuse was still burning. However, it didn't take long before a loud boom was heard from the Great Xia army. Along with the sudden burst of flames, the catapults were instantly turned into fragments that flew in all directions. The fragments hit the iron shields at the front of the battle formation and produced a sound of collision. A few soldiers who were reloading around the catapults were sent flying by the blast of the explosion. 2 of the soldiers who were close to the catapults were only left with some broken corpses scattered everywhere. Boom! Just as the Great Xia army was shocked by this sudden unforeseen event, another explosion occurred within their battle formation. This time, it was the unlit explosive tube that was blown into the Great Xia battle formation and exploded again. At least a dozen soldiers in a radius of more than 10 meters were sent flying by this explosion, and the soldiers within a radius of 5 meters were directly blown to pieces. Good stuff. Li Qianqiu exclaimed in delight when he saw this scene from the city wall. Use this box sparingly and use it specifically to deal with their siege equipment. Without the siege equipment, they probably can't do anything other than besiege the city. If we continue to waste time here, they will need to consume a large amount of food, Renbaqian exhorted. He was afraid that Li Qianqiu would squander it as he pleased. With this thing, no matter how many people they send, they can only watch from below. Li Qianqiu laughed heartily and patted Renbaqian's shoulder. Subsequently, he instructed a few guards to use the bone arrows according to the method just now. After witnessing the explosion within the Great Xia battle formation, these guards were very careful and immediately shot out the bone arrows as soon as they were lit. They were afraid that the arrows would explode in their hands. Every 1 or 2 minutes, they could see a burst of fire in front of the Great Xia battle formation and the sound of an explosion. In just a short while, the 6 catapults in the east of Lan City were turned into a pile of broken wood. Following which, a few explosions could be heard from the north of the city, followed by the east. In just a short while, all the catapults of the Great Xia army had been turned into broken wood along with hundreds of soldiers who were either killed by the explosives or injured by the broken wood. Look after this thing and take good care of it. If anything goes wrong, I will hold you responsible, Li Qianqiu said sternly to the guards behind him. Don't worry, Protector General. Don't let it come into contact with an open flame or bump into it. You must store it carefully. Place it in a cool and dry place, and remember not to come into contact with fire. Renbaqian exhorted repeatedly. Earthlings knew the danger of this thing and that it couldn't come into contact with fire, but he was still a little worried about the people of Dayou. If these things exploded, he estimated that a quarter of Liao City would be destroyed. Sir, don't worry. The guards behind him cupped their hands. With these catapults destroyed, Great Xia probably wouldn't launch another attack today. Li Qianqiu continued to stay on the city wall to inspect while Renbaqian followed the Empress back to the city commander's residence. On the way back, Renbaqian opened his eyes wide and spoke nonsense. Her Majesty has lost some weight. The Empress wasn't an ordinary person, so her body naturally wouldn't become fat or skinny just because she ate more or less. The Empress, on the other hand, was very pleased and lightly glanced at him. The guards behind him looked up at the sky and pretended that they didn't hear anything. In the north of Liao City, in a large tent behind the tens of thousands of soldiers, a general with hair and beard was standing in front of a table, looking at the map on it. From time to time, he would make gestures on it. Great General. A middle-aged man who looked like a scholar came in from outside the tent and cupped his hands. In the tent was the commander of the 700,000-strong army, the champion general, Marquis Wuxing, Jin Ling. His reputation among the people of Great Xia was far inferior to that of Hongwu and Dayou. This was also because Great Xia hadn't made any progress in the south for 70 years. In fact, his reputation in the imperial court was extremely high, and he could be said to be one of the top 3 in the army. In just a few decades, Wu Xingho had risen from a commoner to a rank 3 great general. From this, one could see a thing or two about Wu Xingho's status. He had been stationed at the border for more than 20 years and had prepared for more than 20 years. Even in his dreams, he had been thinking about how to attack Dayou. Now, he could finally achieve his lifelong wish. The current situation of the war was also in line with his expectations. Next, it would depend on who was better. How's Lu Pinghai's injury? Wu Xingho asked without raising his head. Great General, Lu Pinghai's injury has already recovered by half. He should be fine in another month. The scholar cupped his hands. There's still time, Wu Xingho said softly. Li Yuanzhu has sent a letter. She still doesn't agree, the scholar continued. As expected. Wu Xingho wasn't surprised. Have you found Lu Zijin? There's no news yet, the scholar continued. The whereabouts of the second most powerful expert in the world, Lu Zijin, had always been unpredictable. As for the world's most powerful expert, Lin Xian, there had been no trace of her for several years. Many people suspected that she was no longer in this world, or that she had broken through the legendary boundary. Do you think that Qi Zixiao will leave Liao City? Wu Xingho asked casually. Absolutely not. If she leaves Liao City, she will be abandoning the tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians in Liao City. Qi Zixiao will never do such a thing. Unless it's a matter of life and death, she won't leave if she drags on like this, the scholar said decisively. Wu Xingho nodded. It was exactly what he thought. By the time she wanted to leave, it would already be too late. Wu Xingho moved his finger from one point to another on the map. Finally, he pressed his finger on one of the points. That was where his target was. Not only was it the only way to Lan City and the Protectorate of the North, but it was also the only way to return to the Protectorate of the Northeast. As long as he occupied this place, even if Qi Zixiao could escape, she would lose a large piece of fertile land in the north. Is there any news from the Yun nation? They are still quarreling in the imperial court, the scholar replied softly. Have they forgotten that they were almost wiped out by those barbarians? Wu Xingho sneered in disdain. Those fellows who are full of the aura of merchants, even without them, with the great general's long preparation, it's not impossible to take down Dayo, the scholar immediately added. The walls of Lan City are only 6 meters thick. These catapults will be able to break through Liao City. One had to know that the walls of Tiesua Pass, Shun City, and Ziyue City in the north were all 20 meters thick. Tiesua Pass was even 30 meters thick. On the other hand, the walls of Lan City were only 6 meters thick. As long as the catapults hit it a few more times, they would be able to create a breach. We can't enter even if we break it. Wu Xingho said faintly. In a place like the city, the strong individual strength of the aboriginals could be unleashed. He would rather let the aboriginals die near the city walls than let the soldiers enter the city to fight the aboriginals. Those aboriginal commoners would probably cause a lot of casualties. Not to mention, there were also the winged cavalry warriors inside. However, if the city walls were really broken through, those thunder cannons that had been developed would come in handy. At the thought of the cannons in his hands called the myriad flower bomb, Wu Xingho felt that the imperial court should really reward those craftsmen handsomely. Just as the two of them were chatting, they heard a few loud sounds that were different from the sound of huge rocks smashing on the city walls. Which bastard used the thunder cannons? This kind of explosion immediately made Wu Xingho think of the Vulcan cannons and the thunder fire powder that were stored in the army. Then, Wu Xingho rejected this idea. Without his order, who would dare to use the thunder cannons? Just as he walked out of the big tent, he heard another loud sound in front of the battle formation. Boom! Wu Xingho frowned. What exactly was going on? This was clearly the sound of the thunder cannons being fired. However, the sound was much louder when it reached here. Before he could figure it out, there were a few more loud sounds in front of him. Someone, go and see what's going on, Wu Xingho said in a deep voice. After a quarter of an hour, a general wearing iron armor came back. He knelt on one knee and said, Great General, I don't know why, but a fireball suddenly appeared out of nowhere at the catapult. It was very powerful and completely destroyed the catapult. After another quarter of an hour, there were also urgent reports from the east and west. The catapults in those two directions had also been destroyed. Chapter 353. When are you going back? The Empress asked Rinpochen as soon as she sat down in the same courtyard. I'll go back tonight, Rinpochen replied without hesitation. Bring me wine, popcorn, candy, chocolate, television dramas. The Empress counted with her fingers. Rinpochen was stunned. Your Majesty, we're at war now, can you be more serious? The metal chain rose from Renbachian's head and twisted. Just as it formed an S shape, the figure of the Empress, who was beside Renbachian, suddenly moved. The metal chain quickly retracted, but the Empress grabbed the top of it and pulled it out. What's this? Your Majesty, be gentle, be gentle. Don't break it. Otherwise, you will. Renbachian suddenly felt that something wasn't right halfway through his sentence. He quickly swallowed the words he was about to say and burped in a hurry. What will I do? The Empress asked doubtfully. Or I will be out of luck, Renbachian quickly said. Then, he quickly explained the origin of the metal chain. It can actually be like this. The Empress was surprised after hearing it. But very quickly, with a playful look on her face, she pulled out the metal chain on top of Renbachian's head a little, and then a little more. After pulling out 7 to 8 meters of the metal chain, Renbachian felt an indescribable pain in his head, causing him to hurriedly scream ouch, ouch, and move closer to the Empress. So it's this long. The Empress saw the limit. She let go and the metal chain retracted into Renbachian's head at lightning speed. She then patted his head. Your Majesty. Renbachian wanted to cry but had no tears. What happened to the heaven-grade weapon? What happened to the binding? Why did he suddenly feel as if he was tied to a dog leash just now? Your Majesty, is there any problem with the food in the city? Renbachian asked. The Empress frowned and replied, it can last for another month. So little. Renbachian was a little surprised. He thought that the food stored in the city was enough to last for a year and a half. It's already a lot. The Empress felt that Renbachian's reaction was a little strange. My people mainly eat meat, so there naturally isn't much food in the city. If it wasn't for the fact that after Ziwa city was breached, the soldiers and commoners had persuaded all the villages along the way to bring their livestock here when they retreated, there wouldn't have been so much food. However, I only managed to last for so long because I reduced my consumption, the Empress said faintly. What about the food in Tiesua Pass and Shun City? Renbachian immediately thought of this problem. Half of the space in Tiesua Pass is used to store livestock. It can last longer than here, but not by much, the Empress said. Looks like this war can't last for too long. Now that the North has fortified its defenses and cleared out the wilderness, the food and livestock have been greatly reduced. If this continues for too long, I'm afraid it won't be able to hold on, Renbachian said as he thought about it. We just need to defeat them within a month. The Water Empress said matter-of-factly. What should we do? Renbachian was shocked. It seemed like the Empress had her own ideas. Before you came, I was still thinking, Renbachian, you're here. Now it's you who wants to, Renbachian, shall we think of a way to burn Great Xiao's rations? Renbachian immediately had this idea. I don't need too much rations. It's fine as long as you have less rations. Great Xia had 170,000 soldiers here, and they needed a lot of rations. The supply line was long, and it was impossible to get supplies every day. As long as the rations of the Great Xia army were burned, they wouldn't be able to sit still. Of course, the protection of the rations of the Great Xia army was a top priority. It wouldn't be easy to achieve this. All right, the Empress said straightforwardly. In addition to burning the rations, it was also necessary to intercept the rations. Renbachian immediately suggested eliminating the winged cavalry from scouting and searching for the other party's rations transport team. With the strength of the winged cavalry, they could completely disperse and scout in groups of 2 or 3. After discovering the other party's rations transport team, they would gather together to intercept and burn the rations. Li Qinqiu has already sent people to find their rations transport route. The Empress nodded slightly. Renbachian felt a little relieved. It seemed like the Aboriginals weren't all brainless. To be able to become the Protector General of a region, he definitely wasn't an ordinary person. It was impossible for others to think of something that Rinpoche immediately thought of. However, presumably, Deo would also think of it. Rinpoche felt that he needed some good stuff. After chatting with the Empress for a while, Rinpoche told her about the great Xia army he encountered on his way here and their cannons. After hearing from the Empress, he found out that the Protectorate of the North had already discovered this thing, but it wasn't very powerful and wasn't taken seriously. It's not powerful for a fortified city, but for a stronghold in the wilderness, it's already quite powerful. The other party can use the cannons to destroy the stronghold before charging in. This will reduce the number of casualties. Rinpoche said this because he grew up on Earth and understood the use of gunpowder since he was young. He also knew the power of gunpowder, so he somewhat valued it. In the eyes of the Empress and the other generals, it was the great Xia practitioners who were under greater pressure. There weren't many aboriginal strongholds, and most of them fought one-on-one. On the contrary, the great Xia practitioners were able to fully display their strength. Even after fortifying the strongholds, the role of the great Xia practitioners in attacking the strongholds couldn't be underestimated. That night, Rinpoche returned to Earth and immediately called Yang Sr., "I want a nuclear bomb." "Impossible." Yang Sen suddenly quivered. "Why did you do this again?" "Sarin gas." "Impossible." "White phosphorus bombs." "Impossible as well." Yang Sen's head was throbbing. "Can the things you want not be so dangerous? None of them can be given to you. We are at war." "Did you hear me clearly? We are at war. If you can't do this and that, can we continue our cooperation?" Rinpoche roared as he slammed the table. "I can give you guns and bullets, such as the anti-aircraft machine gun from last time, or conventional equipment like rifles." Although he had heard Rinpoche's explanation before, Yang Sen still felt that it was too strange for the cultivators from the paradise to use these ordinary people's weapons to fight a war. Mortars and incendiary steel ball bombs. Yang Sen hesitated for a while. The power of these weapons wasn't small either. Finally, he nodded slowly and asked, "What caliber?" "Give me 2 Type 93 60mm mortars first and 70 incendiary steel ball bombs." Rinpoche immediately said. Sure enough, dealing with Yang Sen required him to raise the price as high as he could. If Rinpoche had asked for 60mm mortars at the start, he would probably have wanted to give him grenades. At that time, he would have to waste his breath again. Also, a matching instruction manual and a firing table. Also, a few sets of good night vision goggles. Send them over in 2 days. Rinpoche hung up the phone and thought that these things should be enough. The 60mm mortars had a range of 5,564 meters, which was equivalent to 5 kilometers away. They could hit the enemy's main camp from the top of the city wall. The incendiary steel ball bombs had a destructive radius of 20 meters. After the explosion, the steel balls could sweep through the area within a radius of 20 meters. Furthermore, the arsonist could ignite flammable objects within a radius of 12 meters. It was perfect for burning rations and fodder. When he thought about how these things would take at least 2 to 3 days to be delivered, he felt that he should really buy a house near Shanghai so that it would be more convenient to look for Yang Sen or do other things. Rinpoche then took a pen and paper and began to calculate. Each mortar weighed 45 kilograms. 2 sets weighed 90 kilograms. 1 shell weighed 5 kilograms. 70 of them weighed 300 kilograms. He also needed 2 sets of drones, which weighed 30 kilograms. 20 walkie-talkies weighed 40 kilograms. 2 walkie-talkie relay stations weighed 60 kilograms. 2 sets of small solar batteries and solar panels weighed 80 kilograms. All these added up to 650 kilograms. Chapter 354. In the Great Xia barracks, Wu Xingho sat in the seat of honor and ordered, "Pass down the order. Continue to attack the city today and increase the intensity. Use the scaling ladders to attack the city in turn. Maintain the strength of 3 battalions and attack the city at the same time. Don't give them a chance to catch their breath." "Yes." Immediately, a general received the order and went to inform the others. "That poison warrior arrived at Liao City, right?" Wu Xingho asked again. "According to the description of the mounted scouts, it should be him," a general below said with his fists cupped. At the mention of the poison warrior, the generals below all looked uncomfortable. After all, no one wanted to meet such a person on the battlefield. It would be too depressing to be poisoned to death without even having the chance to attack. Fortunately, everyone was prepared this time. "Have you distributed the Wuma grass?" Wu Xingho asked calmly. "According to the great general's orders, they have all been sent down," the general immediately replied. Dozens of doctors from Great Xia died before they managed to verify that the remaining toxins in the 9 pavilions, the Liaoning Mountain Pass, and the Falling Moon Gorge were all of the same type. Furthermore, they managed to find a way to alleviate the toxins. It was a type of wushu grass that was commonly seen in the northwest of Great Xia. It was slightly poisonous, but it was just enough to alleviate the toxins. As long as one placed the witch horse grass in their mouths, they would be able to alleviate the poison. In such an open area, even if the other party used poison, the Wuma grass would not cause much damage. As for the side effects of the Wuma grass, they could be completely ignored. In the morning, after breakfast, the Great Xia army arranged their battle formation and began to lead their soldiers to attack the city. Battle cries could be heard from 3 directions. In the south of the city, there were also many mounted scouts, as well as groups of roaming cavalry. However, the Empress, Li Qianqiu, and the rest didn't feel too pressured. Instead, they were in high spirits as they watched him fiddle with the drone. When the drone took off, Li Qianqiu and the other generals exclaimed in surprise again. Half an hour later, the drone landed, and Renbaqian roughly drew the layout of the barracks in the east of the city according to the pictures. Then, he compared the details one by one. The fence outside the Great Xia barracks was only 3 meters tall, but after jumping over the wall, there were caltrops scattered all over the place. These caltrops were specially used to prevent the aboriginals from climbing over the wall and launching night attacks. Inside the barracks, there were 4 cannons that Renbaqian had seen before facing each barrack gate. The Great Xia army had put in a lot of effort to prevent the aboriginals from launching a night attack. Fortunately, the aboriginals of the aboriginals had come. Of the aboriginals' attack. Now that they had the map, they immediately knew the weak points of the barracks like the back of their hands. They also found a few places where rations might be stored. Renbaqian used 2 drones to take pictures of the Great Xia barracks at the east gate and the north gate from an altitude of 600 meters. The batteries of the 2 drones were charged while Renbaqian flipped through the images of the Great Xia army's battle formation and attack. Of and Ren Xia Xia every one of. Of. Each of the picture was of the Xia of the War of Xia Yang and was very of. In the afternoon, Renbaqian carried the mortar up the city wall. War cries could be heard from the top and bottom of the city wall. The entire city wall was filled with people, and there were more than 20 scaling ladders on the city wall. Great Xia's soldiers climbed up the scaling ladders while carrying flying crossbows. Just as they climbed up the city wall, they were chopped down by a sword and fell down with a blood-curdling screech. From time to time, a squad leader would climb up the city wall in an attempt to gain a foothold, but they wouldn't last more than a minute before falling off the city wall. Below the city wall, the archers of Great Xia had already reached a distance of about 100 meters below the city wall and were shooting arrows upward. "Hurry up and get some scarecrows," Renbaqian subconsciously shouted when he saw this scene. "Sir, what did you say?" Sure Hu asked as he brandished his blade and cut down a few arrows that were flying towards them. "Get some scarecrows here. The arrowheads will break when these arrows land on the ground." Renbochin pointed at the arrows that had landed on the stone building behind him with a look of resentment on his face. These arrows were much better than the bone arrows used by the Aboriginals. Furthermore, the arrows in the city were getting lesser and lesser. These arrows could be used to replenish the supply. However, if the arrowhead were to crash into a rock and fall off, the flight would be unstable, and the arrow would be useless. After finishing his sentence, Renbochin looked outside the city wall and immediately retracted his head. He carried the mortar down the city wall and shouted to Shirhu, "Quickly get Surly to put some scarecrows on the city wall. Then, get some wood and straw to cover the back of the city wall so that these arrows can be used." After yelling, Renbochin found a flat ground to place the mortar. He adjusted the angle of the mortar according to the firing meter and scope, stepped on the bottom of the bracket with one foot, pointed to the guard beside him and said, "Come and support this." After the guard supported the mortar, Renbochin put the mortar into the barrel, released it, and quickly covered his ears. With a slight clang, the mortar fell to the bottom of the barrel, and the firing mechanism at the bottom of the mortar was activated. Bang! A shell flew out of the barrel, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. The sound was softer than what Renbochin had imagined. It was a little like the sound of popcorn exploding on the street when he was young. Renbochin quickly ran to the city wall. Halfway there, he heard a boom outside the city. He climbed up the city wall and quickly looked for the landing point of the mortar. It was easy to find as long as he could see a place with a lot of people. With a radius of 20 meters, it was more than 1,000 square meters. When Renbochin looked out, he saw a lot of people lying on the ground behind the archers. There were at least 300 to 400 casualties, and many of their limbs were nowhere to be found. The steel balls in the mortar flew in all directions at the moment of the explosion, hitting the people in the area like sieves. At the same time, countless sparks also fell in the surroundings, igniting the clothes of many soldiers, and the area was in chaos. A few lucky people who escaped the disaster stood in the pile of corpses, looking at the tragic situation around them and listening to the screams of the injured. Their faces were full of sluggish expressions. The people around them were also shocked by this unforeseen event. Many of them were at a loss and didn't know what had happened. Looking at the mutilated people, their faces revealed a look of horror. For these soldiers, killing with real swords and guns and this kind of attack that they didn't know what was going on were two different things. Soon, under the urging of the rear, they rushed toward the city wall again. "It's crooked." Renbochin spat on the ground. However, the power was greater than he had expected. One mortar could kill 3 to 4 people, 10 could kill 3 to 4,000 people, and 70 could kill 20 to 30,000 people. He could eliminate 1/3 of these great Xia soldiers in 2 trips. If he was more diligent, he could make the great Xia soldiers outside the city cry in a month. However, this was just a thought. The great Xia soldiers weren't fools and would probably find a way to reduce the casualties after a period of time. Furthermore, if the other party wasn't so concentrated, they wouldn't be able to achieve such great results. "Sir Ren, this thing is really too powerful." A few guards at the side couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Renbochin couldn't be bothered with them. This thing was already a modern standard equipment, so of course it was powerful in the eyes of these people. Previously, when he used an electric baton, they all regarded it as a divine weapon. After confirming the position, Renbochin ran down the city wall again, adjusted the angle of the mortar, and fired another mortar shell. Boom! A mortar shell suddenly fell from the rear of the great Xia archers. Countless steel balls were shot in all directions like bullets, and a large number of sparks scattered in all directions. The steel balls shot in all directions, turning the archers in front and the shield bearers in front into sieves. Renbochin climbed up the city wall and carefully examined it for a long time before spitting out, "Damn it, it's crooked again." He returned to the bottom of the city wall, adjusted the angle, fired the mortar, and fired. Boom! Renbochin climbed up the city wall and saw that there was another man-made no-man's land below. Everyone in the vicinity had become corpses and were lying on the ground, wailing in pain. It was still a little crooked, but the distance was still acceptable as it was only 10 meters off. For Renbochin, this was already within an acceptable range. After the battle was over, it was time to pack up. Renbochin carried the mortar back to the city commander's residence. The Empress, who was focused on watching a television series, raised her head and asked, "I heard that the effect is pretty good." "Indeed, it's pretty good." Renbochin gave her a thumbs up. "Are you going to use this to launch a night attack?" The Empress asked again. "It's to burn the rations and launch a night attack," Renbochin corrected her. After a while, Li Qianqiu, who had heard the news, rushed over and laughed. "Principal Ren, I heard that you have something good. Let me try it. I will let you have a look at it tonight." Renbochin waved his hand. "Great!" Li Qianqiu was overjoyed. Now that he had the blueprints of the Great Xia barracks and the weapons in Renbochin's hands, he could finally teach those Great Xia people a lesson. Not long after Renbochin left, Wu Xingho frowned as he looked at the shields in front of him that were embedded with many 3mm marbles. What was it this time? He suddenly felt that some variables had appeared in this war. Where did those barbarians get their hands on these weapons that were so lethal? The day before yesterday, the catapults in 3 directions were destroyed, and today, thousands of soldiers were injured or killed with just 3 loud bangs. This situation was completely beyond his expectations. If the other party continued to use such weapons, how could he stop them? Furthermore, there were already 2 types of weapons that he had never seen before. Did those barbarians have anything else? Chapter 355. Walkie-talkies. Do you all know what they are? Renbochin placed a row of walkie-talkies on the table. Li Qianqiu's subordinates were eager to take action. Each winged cavalry captain had one, and they had long been envious of it. "If you don't understand, ask someone who does," Renbochin said faintly. "Everyone take one." Dozens of hands swept across the table, and only 3 walkie-talkies were left. The military system of the Protectorate of the Center was different from that of the winged cavalry. There was one captain for every 100 winged cavalry soldiers, and they were all at the advanced level of the Earth will level or above. In the Protectorate of the Center, a captain led 300 soldiers, and they were generally at the intermediate level of the Earth will level. Put this in the city. As long as you are within 15 kilometers of Liao City, you can use it as a transit point. Renbochin put the repeater station aside. This night vision device. Surely, you can arrange for these too. Don't use it during the day. Renbochin took out 5 pairs of infrared night vision devices. 2 of them were for the Protectorate of the Center, 2 were for the winged cavalry, and the last one was for himself. This thing is an infrared imaging device. Different temperatures show different colors, and it can be detected even from inside a tent. Through this device, you can see if the other party is in the camp and if there is an ambush. Later on, you can go out and try it on each other. This device can see heat emitted by humans, animals, and even torches. Pay attention to distinguish them, Renbochin explained. Thinking back to the rumors on the internet that infrared could see through clothes, Renbochin was a little excited when he got this device. He immediately drove a few laps on the streets. He only realized that it was pure nonsense after he tried it himself. This device could see the heat emitted by the human body. What could it see from the heat emitted by the human body? It was all red and yellow color blocks. The eyes of the group of people at the side lit up like lasers after listening to him. what was the most frightening thing about a night attack? The most frightening thing was that the other party was already prepared and waiting for you to walk into a trap. With this device, it could be seen at a glance whether the other party was sleeping in the camp. Or if the other party was lying in ambush, it could be seen at a glance. It can only see through materials like tents that can penetrate light. Remember, it can't work on walls. Do you all know about this mission? Renbochin asked again. Everyone nodded. Remember, even if you are surrounded by thousands of flowers, don't let a single leaf touch you. Run away after you're done flirting, and you won't be responsible for it. Renbochin saw that everyone nodded their heads and didn't say anything else. He believed that Li Qinshu had already made arrangements for these matters. It's a moonless and windy night. It's time to sneak around. Let's go. Renbochin waved his hands. Everyone, 5,000 people slipped down the rope without even opening the east gate. If it wasn't for the loud sound of landing, many people would have jumped down the wall. Renbochin stood at the top of the city wall and scanned the surroundings with his night vision goggles. He saw two groups of soldiers about 1 kilometer away, and it seemed like they were sent by the Great Xia army to patrol. Apart from that, there were also a few scattered dots, which were the hidden sentries of Great Xia. Take care of everything, Renbochin instructed the guards, turned to look at the Empress, and asked, Your Majesty, you don't have to go, right? The Empress thought for a long time and said faintly, Since I have nothing to do, I can't sleep anyway. When Renbochin grabbed the rope and landed on the ground, the Empress moved and appeared beside him. After arranging the troops, everyone slowly moved toward the northeast. The Great Xia patrolling soldiers emitted a dazzling glow through the night vision goggles. They could be seen from a few kilometers away and could directly avoid them. As for the hidden sentries, they were pinched to death by the winged cavalry. 5,000 people advanced all the way to a suitable position. Li Qinshu turned to look at Renbochin, and after seeing him nod, he waved his hand. The winged cavalry and the soldiers from the protectorate of the center split into two groups and moved toward the eastern and northern camps of Liao City. Renbochin waved his hand to get someone to bring the mortars and ammunition boxes over. Then, he adjusted the angle of the mortars. Two mortars, one facing the eastern camp and the other facing the northern camp, were aimed at the location where the rations were stored, which had been photographed by the unmanned reconnaissance aircraft during the day. In any case, the positions were known, and the angle was adjusted. As for whether they could hit the targets, it was up to fate. At the thought of this, Renbochin felt that he had forgotten something during the night raid and had forgotten to offer the three animals. In position in the east. We are 300 meters away and can't get any closer. In position in the north, 350 meters away. Renbochin rubbed his hands, turned to the Empress, and asked, Your Majesty, do you want to give it a try? The Empress was a little tempted. It seemed rather interesting. How do I do it? In a while, both of us will put the cannonball into the barrel together. When I say to fire, just let go. Renbochin handed her a cannonball and got two guards to hold the body of the cannon. Renbochin stuffed the end of the cannonball into the barrel. After seeing that the Empress followed his instructions, he slowly said, 1, 2, 3, fire. Bang! Bang! The sounds of the two cannonballs overlapping each other were heard. At the same time, smoke rose from the muzzle and shot into the sky. Fire! Fire! After each of them fired 3 cannonballs in a row, Renbochin began to adjust the angle of the mortars and moved to another location. When a loud explosion was heard from the Great Xia barracks in the distance, the Empress's eyes lit up. This thing was indeed very interesting. The sudden explosion immediately alarmed the Great Xia barracks. It's a night raid. Such shouts immediately spread throughout the barracks. Soldiers were rushing out of their tents with weapons in hand, creating a scene of chaos. Kill! Suddenly, the shouts rang out from outside the Great Xiao barracks. Figures appeared beside the fence, kicked it down with a few kicks, ran for a distance, and leaped a few meters over the caltrops scattered on the ground. The long sabers in their hands also slashed at the Great Xiao soldiers who had just run out of the tents in front of them without even putting on their clothes. These caltrops happened to be inside the fence where the lights couldn't reach. If it wasn't for the fact that there were drones to detect them in advance, many of them would have been killed. Furthermore, the edge of the caltrops happened to be at the edge of the fence after it fell. It was obvious that the other party was eager for them to launch a night raid. Just as the soldiers who launched a night raid rushed into the barracks, the sounds of killing and chaos immediately increased. Blood and severed limbs were scattered everywhere on the ground and the surrounding tents. Fire! 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 Another 6 cannonballs exploded into the 2 barracks separately. When they exploded, the sparks that sprayed into the surroundings immediately ignited the surrounding provisions, fodder, and tents. There's a fire! Such shouts came one after another and intertwined with the sounds of killing in the distance. A few of the winged cavalry warriors were killing to their heart's content in the barracks. Seeing that a group of hundreds of Great Xiao soldiers had already gathered in the distance, one of the winged cavalry warriors grinned and said, "Block them for me." After saying that, he took out a black round tube from his pocket, lit it with a match, and threw the explosive tube at the other party. Boom! The explosive directly exploded in the middle of those people. A few of the winged cavalry warriors shouted, "Kill!" They wielded their sabers and leaped forward. Like tigers entering a flock of sheep, the sabers and blood splattered among the people who were still standing. In just a short while, only a few winged cavalry warriors were left standing, covered in blood, and they continued to kill in other directions. Such scenes could be seen everywhere in the entire barracks. For this night raid, Renbaqian had brought all the things that he could bring. Renbaqian looked at the flames in the distance and listened to the sounds of killing. He quickly adjusted the angle of the mortar and didn't forget to take out a white rabbit creamy candy from his pocket and hand it to the Empress. Chapter 356. Wu Xingho stood in front of the big tent. A group of soldiers and generals had already gathered around him, and more soldiers were gathering in his direction. Those aboriginals were only killing from afar. When they saw the situation here, they didn't come over at all and simply turned to kill in other directions. "Sir, there are at least 2,000 barbarians, and a lot of rations have been burned," the general on night patrol immediately reported. The general on night patrol immediately reported. When the first shell landed and exploded, he reacted and immediately gathered the soldiers who had been awakened. However, the tent was too big. There were tens of thousands of people in the tent, and he could only gather a small portion of them. Other than the fact that the Aboriginals' attacks had caused the soldiers in some places to panic, there were also attacks coming from an unknown source that would create loud noises. The combination of these two factors made the barracks even more chaotic, and it was even more difficult to control the chaos. "Arrange the battle formation and press forward. Gather the other soldiers and don't give those barbarians any chance," Wu Xingho said in a deep voice. As long as this group of soldiers stopped those barbarians, the other soldiers would be like a small stream flowing into the sea, and the chaos would naturally be pacified. "Dou Liqing, bring some men to gather the other soldiers, look after the rations, and put out the fire," Wu Xingho continued. His voice was calm and didn't have the slightest hint of panic. The commander wasn't panicking at all, and the others were more or less at ease. "Yes." Another general immediately received the order and left. In less than 15 minutes, another explosion occurred near the rations. 3 mortar shells were fired consecutively, and some soldiers guarding the rations were blown into the sky. A general's gaze pierced through the chaotic barracks like a sharp arrow and directly looked into the darkness in the distance. Just now, he heard a few noises in that direction. It wasn't loud, but he caught it. He leaped up and landed on the top of a flagpole and looked into the distance. From this position, he could even see a corner of the barracks in the east of Liao City. Great General, that attack came from the sky. Another rations camp was destroyed, and all the soldiers nearby have lost their combat power. A low-ranking general covered in blood hurried over. Hearing this, Wu Xinghuo's brows furrowed even more. From the sky. Did you see anyone in the surroundings? Sir, there are no aboriginals in the surroundings. That thing fell from the sky and then suddenly exploded. Several hundred of our brothers died just like that. The officer miserably said. Great General, I suspect that the attack that made the loud noise was launched from a distance like a catapult or a thunder cannon. The general, whose gaze was like a sharp arrow, jumped down and said. At the same time, he pointed to the southeast of the barracks, where the aboriginals had attacked. Judging from the sounds, General Jia of the East Camp is also under attack. I suspect the situation should be similar. The enemy attacked us and General Jia at the same time. The position where the enemy threw the cannon should be somewhere between the main camp and the East Camp. Just now, I heard the sound from there. It was similar to the sound of the thunder cannon being fired. Hearing this, Wu Xinghuo's expression suddenly changed, and he asked in a deep voice, How is the Wu camp now? Sir, the Wu camp has not been affected, someone immediately replied. If we send out the Wu camp, they will definitely attack again. We must find out where they are and how they are doing it. It would be best if he could snatch back some of the enemy's weapons. Chen Shi, follow them. If it succeeds, you will be given credit. Although the chaos in the main camp continued, Wu Xinghuo's mind was already occupied with more important issues. He had to get his hands on the weapons used by the aboriginals. Even if he couldn't, he had to at least find out what the enemy was using and where their weaknesses were. Just as he finished arranging the personnel and neatly arranged the soldiers into a formation, several loud noises suddenly rang out from the position where the soldiers were gathered. When a few winged cavalry warriors saw the explosives exploding in the midst of the enemy, they laughed loudly, turned around, and ran away. Sir, there are a lot of people coming from the main camp of Great Xia. Without looking up, Renbochin adjusted the angle and fired 3 more rounds with the Empress. Then, he took the night vision goggles and looked in the direction that the guard was pointing. So many people. Renbochin was slightly surprised. Through the infrared night vision goggles, he saw a large wave of people dressed in red and yellow running in this direction. They aren't ordinary soldiers. Renbochin added. This could be seen from the movement and speed of the other party. The other party seemed to have confirmed the direction and were quickly advancing in this direction. Although they tried to maintain a similar speed, it was obvious that there was some confusion. Renbochin felt that these people didn't look like ordinary Great Xia soldiers. This could be seen from their movements. They were very agile even though it was night time. They were either experts in the army or practitioners from Great Xia. Sir, don't worry. With us around, we will definitely not let them get close. The guard at the side rubbed his palms and smiled. After being exposed to the wind for half a day, they had finally arrived. In addition to Renbochin's and the Empress's guards, there were also more than 100 winged cavalry warriors. There should be no more than 1,000 people on the other side. More than 200 Earth Will experts were enough to make them run over and crawl back. In that case, you guys go ahead. Leave 2 people for me to carry the bombs. Renbochin saw that they were all in high spirits, so he simply ignored them and continued to fire his own bombs. Just now, he had already fired 5 rounds and a total of 30 mortar shells. There were only 7 places where the other party stored their rations. After blowing up the other 2 locations, he could use the remaining dozen mortar shells to bombard the first location. If the other party had people fighting the fire, they would have hit the jackpot. Or, if there were any missed bombs, he could make up for it this time. Renbochin and the Empress continued to fire excitedly. Other than a few guards, the rest of the people surrounded the incoming people. Many of the great Xia practitioners ran to a place not far from their target. With the help of the moonlight, they saw a black mass of heads not far away. "Be careful, there's an ambush," someone shouted. "Ambush my ass," an aboriginal winged cavalry warrior scolded. "Was there a need for an ambush to deal with you guys?" He drew his saber and met them head-on. As soon as the two sides collided, the great Xia practitioners were stunned. Although they expected there to be guards, they didn't expect them to be earth will experts. There were more than 200 of them, and all of them were at the earth will level. 1/6 of the winged cavalry warriors were here. Fortunately, they had a lot of people and many experts, so they were already prepared for an encounter with the winged cavalry. The great Xia practitioners immediately got into formation. Most of the sects formed small and big formations to barely resist these winged cavalry warriors and guards. Some of the remaining experts and disciples joined forces to deal with these winged cavalry warriors, and a small number of people tried to cross the crowd and rush to the back. A man leaped more than 10 meters into the air, and a 6-meter-long spear as thick as the mouth of a bull suddenly appeared in his hand. As soon as the spear appeared, everyone could immediately feel a huge pressure. Mountain-breaking spear, Xiao Shan has made his move. The great Xia practitioners saw this scene and became very spirited. This was one of the two spirit will experts in the military camp. The spirit will level wasn't as simple as being one level higher. If the two experts were comparable in strength, dozens of earth will experts wouldn't be a match for a spirit will expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. With him making his move, even if the other party was these winged cavalry warriors, they wouldn't lose this time. Needless to say, there was still a spirit will expert. This time, they would definitely win. Spirit will level. Many of the winged cavalry looked up and continued to do what they were supposed to do. Her Majesty was still behind them. So what if he was a spirit will expert? The man named Xiao Shan in the air had a stern look on his face. Although the spear in his hand was still a little illusory, it was already enough for him to be proud of. Then, like a missile, he followed the momentum of the spear and pierced toward Renbochin's position with the force of 1,000 kilograms. Renbochin's hair immediately stood on end, and his whole body stiffened. The feeling of impending disaster filled his whole body. Good spear technique. So domineering. Some of the great Xia practitioners immediately praised loudly. They boasted that if they were to face this spear, they probably wouldn't even have the chance to escape. Although many of the great Xia practitioners were fighting, many of them were paying attention to Xiao Shan's moves, hoping to learn something from him. After all, it wasn't easy to see a spirit will expert in action. Humph. The Empress's cold snort resounded throughout the audience. In a flash, she appeared in front of Xiao Shan and forcefully stepped on the tip of the spear. Xiao Shan suddenly couldn't control himself and plunged downward. When Xiao Shan heard the shouts from below, a sense of heroism rose in his heart. However, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and stepped on the tip of his spear, causing him to lose control. He immediately felt that something was wrong. When he saw the appearance of that person from the corner of his eye, he was scared out of his wits. He pushed the spear downward with both hands and borrowed the force to flip backward. Without saying a word, he turned around and ran. The spear pierced a hole that was dozens of meters deep into the ground and disappeared. Although he knew that Qi Zixiao was in Liao City, he didn't expect her to actually make a move personally. Furthermore, she was here. He originally thought that even if Qi Zixiao made a move, she would be targeting Wu Xingho. When he saw the chaos in the camp just now, he thought that even if Qi Zixiao made a move against Wu Xingho, he would be able to dodge. He didn't expect her to actually be here, and he just had to walk right into a trap. "Where are you running to?" the Empress said coldly. In a flash, she appeared behind Xiao Shan and punched him. Xiao Shan quickly turned around and used both his hands to block. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying dozens of meters away. Then, he ran away at an even faster speed. Using that mouthful of blood just now, he used the simplest method to stimulate his potential. Although he would have to rest for 8 to 10 days after this, it was already a great fortune for him to be able to escape. Many of the great Xia practitioners below saw Xiao Shan condense a heaven-grade weapon with their own eyes. They saw with their own eyes that a red figure appeared in front of him. They saw with their own eyes that when a figure in red appeared, he immediately spat out blood and fled. This scene immediately sent many of the great Xia practitioners, who had just become excited, into hell. Qi Zixiao. They would be fools if they still didn't know who this was. As for the other spirit will expert, he had just sensed the Empress's appearance and immediately slipped away without even showing his face. The Empress landed on the ground with her hands behind her back and her head raised as she walked back to Rinpoche's side. Your Majesty's divine might is matchless. Even an expert who has condensed a heaven-grade weapon will flee at the mere sight of you. Rinpoche took out a handful of chocolate and stuffed it into the Empress's hands. Chapter 357. Junior sister, you go first. I will bring up the rear. Senior brother. The woman's voice was full of twists and turns, and it was heartbreaking. Senior sister, go quickly. Another young man grabbed the woman's hand and ran. When the senior brother saw this scene, his eyes widened and he almost vomited blood. This damn gigolo. Although this world didn't have such incisive summaries as, if you die, other men will sleep with your wife, live in your house, beat your children, and spend your money, his current mood was exactly the same. He almost spat out a mouthful of MMP mixed with old blood. Junior brother, you bring up the rear. I will go first. Another man with a pale face saw that the situation wasn't good, threw down this sentence, and ran away. The moment he turned around, he was stabbed in the back. When he threw himself forward, he realized that his junior brother, who had been fighting alongside him, had already run 20 meters away. Senior brother, I will take care of your wife and children. The junior brother turned his head and saw his senior brother looking at him with bloodshot eyes. He shouted with a face full of grief and ran even faster. When a spirit will expert vomited blood and ran away, the rest of the people didn't dare to stay after seeing this situation and ran away one after another. Some of the elders from their sects were still relatively orderly as they gradually retreated from the battlefield. There were also some elders who went to other places. Only a few of their fellow disciples were left, and it depended on their individual skills. There were also some who stayed and fought to the death. Most of them had poor skills or were entangled too deeply. Knowing that they couldn't escape, they could only struggle and wait for their fellow disciples to escape to help them take care of their families. A very small number of them simply fought until their eyes were bloodshot and their minds were filled with desperate thoughts. Stop chasing. Rinpoche shouted and called back the winged cavalry warriors who were chasing after them. Most of these great Xia practitioners had good skills and weren't something that the aboriginals, who were only good at brute strength, could catch up with. Sir! Everyone resentfully turned back and conveniently stabbed the one who was still gasping for breath on the ground. Great Xia had lost at least 200 of their 700 to 800 people in just one exchange. Bring me my spear. I will let them run 600 meters first. They can count themselves lucky if they escape, but they are unlucky if they don't. Rinpoche said with a benevolent look. If the winged cavalry caught up with those people, it wouldn't be easy for him to shoot. After setting up the gun, Rinpoche put on the night vision goggles, stretched out his hands, and waved to both sides. Get out of the way. If you get accidentally injured, there will be no compensation. Everyone quickly moved to the sides. Through the infrared night vision device, Renbachien saw a patch of alternating red and yellow in the distance. He took aim, spat, and pressed the trigger on both sides of the handle. Da-da-da! The metal bullets formed a long line and pounced towards the great Xia warriors who had run 700 to 800 meters away. They didn't catch up to us. The great Xia practitioners who were running heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that the aboriginal winged cavalry didn't catch up to them. "Let me go," a woman said angrily. "Senior sister. I was in a hurry just now." The man revealed a fawning smile. "Senior brother." The woman turned her head towards the darkness that seemed to be able to devour everyone and shed tears. What remained in her heart was bone-deep hatred. The man looked behind him, then looked at the crying woman. In the end, he sighed softly, but his heart was much more relaxed. "Senior sister, it's not safe here. Let's go back to the camp first," the man said as he pulled the woman's arm. "It's none of your business." The woman pushed him away. However, in the next second, the huge dragon formed by the metal bullets that attacked from the darkness instantly smashed her into pieces, and her severed head fell directly into the arms of the man. Before the man could react to the sudden change, he had already embarked on the same fate as the woman. The speed of the bullets was too fast, and it was pitch black all around. Most of the practitioners were hit before they could even realize it. As long as their limbs were grazed by the bullets, they would immediately be sent flying into the sky. No one had expected such an unforeseen turn of events. The people who had just escaped and heaved a sigh of relief felt as if they had fallen into an icy abyss. "Spread out and escape quickly," an expert immediately shouted when he realized that the bullets that were shot from the darkness could penetrate another person after penetrating one. When Renbachien threw the ammunition belt to one side and reloaded it, he realized that the great Xia practitioners were running everywhere like sheep. He fired again and hit more than 10 people. Then, he put the gun aside and continued to fiddle with the mortars. However, this time, he changed the position and directly aimed at the vicinity of the enemy's camp gate. Although the other party had scattered and escaped, there was still a large number of Aboriginal soldiers on the east side of the camp. The battle cries hadn't stopped yet, so most of the people ran toward the camp gate. Although there weren't any more attacks in the last part of the journey, everyone was still on tenterhooks. The moment they reached the camp, they could finally relax a little. "I'm irreconcilable with those barbarians," some of the practitioners said through gritted teeth with bloodshot eyes. From the moment they met to the moment they ran back to the camp, almost all of them had relatives and friends who had died outside. Anger and hatred filled everyone's hearts. "We will take revenge sooner or later," someone else said. When they reached a safe place, some of the weaker ones or those who had lost their loved ones couldn't help but feel sad. They hid their tears in their eyes and tried hard not to let them fall. "Let's go back first. There will be plenty of opportunities for revenge in the future," someone said. A peak Earth-Will expert's ears twitched, and he suddenly raised his head and exclaimed, "Watch out for the top of your head." "What?" Everyone quickly looked up. However, the sky was too dark, and they couldn't see very far. While everyone was still looking, a dark green shell fell from above and landed right on top of an Earth-Will expert's head. That Earth-Will expert, who had just lost his good friend, was filled with anger and had nowhere to vent his anger. When he saw a strange object that didn't even have a tip falling from above, he didn't even think twice and raised his hand to meet it. Boom! Although everyone wasn't standing too close together, they had just run into the camp and weren't standing too far away. This explosion instantly cleared out a large area. Renbachien still didn't know that his mortar had succeeded. He had the mentality of scaring them to death even if he couldn't bomb them. Did they think that they would be fine after running back to the camp? He would let them see what a long-range attack was and what a big fireball was. "Call me a mage in the future," Renbachien said to the guard beside him and continued to adjust the angle of the mortar. "Sir, what's a mage?" one of the guards asked in a silly voice. "You don't need to know. Just call me that." Renbochin didn't raise his head and felt a little regretful. It was a pity that he didn't have gasoline bombs and only had 2 mortars. Otherwise, he would have shown them what the 5 fireballs were like. Inform them to withdraw. Renbochin estimated that it was about time, especially since there was only a small area left in the east of the northern camp. Yes. The night attack is over. Everyone, withdraw according to the predetermined route. Winged cavalry, bring up the rear. The guard used the walkie-talkie and used the terminology he learned from Renbochin. Lin Xiao, copy. Dongmu, copy. Qinzai, copy. Chapter 358. Sir Ren, they have already withdrawn and are on their way back. Renbochin heard the voice from the walkie-talkie and looked at the 2 barracks. There weren't any Great Xia soldiers chasing after them. After all, the strength of the aboriginals could be better utilized in such a dark night. Furthermore, the 2 barracks had just barely calmed down. He reckoned that treating the wounded, extinguishing the fire, and gathering the disorderly soldiers would take them quite some time. The matter is settled. Withdraw. Renbochin asked his men to carry the mortars, machine guns, and ammunition boxes. Everyone then withdrew unhurriedly. When they arrived at the bottom of the city, they saw that the city gate was wide open, and everyone filed into the city. Not long after everyone returned to the city commander's residence, the casualties were also reported. There weren't many casualties, only a few hundred. Among them, the winged cavalry's losses were negligible. On the other hand, the Protectorate of the Center lost 300 to 400 soldiers. However, half of them returned with serious injuries, and only about 200 died in battle. The Aboriginals' losses were negligible compared to Great Xia's. The Great Xia army lost at least 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers, and a large amount of rations were burned. However, Renbochin's attention was attracted by something that the winged cavalry warriors who returned described. At the end of the night attack, due to the Aboriginals killing in the barracks, the barely gathered troops encountered a batch of bombs and were unable to counterattack. As a result, the eastern barracks brought out a few cannons. The winged cavalry warriors didn't take these things seriously at first, but after the other party ignited the cannons, countless iron nails shot out. A few of them were careless and died on the spot. There were more injured winged cavalry warriors, at least 20 of them. Renbochin held the iron nails in his hand and sized them up. They were about half a foot long and as thick as a pinky. They were made of pig iron and had a hexagonal base that was slightly larger than the diameter. "What's the range of this thing?" Renbochin asked. "About 200 steps. It can kill people at 100 steps, a winged cavalry captain replied. In other words, those who were killed by this thing were fools who didn't know how to dodge when someone pointed this thing at them from 100 steps away, right? Renbochin grumpily asked. The winged cavalry warrior scratched his head and said, "The main thing is that I didn't expect that even though this thing can't hit far, it can hit a group of people at close range. Its strength isn't weak either." He also felt that his subordinates had died unjustly. "There are many unexpected things. If I point this thing at you, will you dodge?" Renbochin took out a pistol from his waist and pointed it at the winged cavalry warrior's head. "Of course we have to hide," the lieutenant hurriedly said. Previously, this Principal Ren had poisoned tens of thousands of people to death. Today, he took out a weapon that could hit the Great Xia soldiers from a few kilometers away. Even though they weren't clear about the specifics, they knew that a bunch of steel balls would sweep out after the explosion and turn people into sieves. Many winged cavalry warriors saw this scene from afar. At present, Renbochin had become a target in the hearts of the winged cavalry. Even though he looked thin and weak, the weapons in his hands were lethal. Now, as long as it was something he took out, no one dared to underestimate it. No matter what, tonight's night attack was a complete victory, and Sir Ren deserves the most credit. Li Qinqiu laughed. Even though they lost 300 to 400 people, it was more than enough to satisfy Great Xiao's losses. Ren Baqin waved his hand and looked as if fame and fortune were fleeting clouds to him. Even though we don't know how much rations the other party has lost, they must have lost some. During the night attack, the winged cavalry and the central army also saw that the place where they stored their rations was on fire. This was something that Ren Baqin had specially asked people to pay attention to. If the other party's rations are greatly damaged, they will definitely ask the rear to transport more rations. In a while, send away some of the walkie-talkies, a repeater station, and a radio station. I suggest that we send some of the winged cavalry warriors with the walkie-talkies, a repeater station, and a radio station out to scout and search separately. If we encounter the fast horses of the Great Xia army, we will immediately intercept and kill them. If we encounter the rations team, we will join forces and take them down if we can. If we can't, we will contact the city through the radio station and send people to provide support. The Empress and Li Qinqiu nodded slightly. Intercepting the other party's rations was a must, and there was nothing wrong with Ren Baqin's suggestion. As for the Great Xia soldiers here, they might have two choices. The first is to withdraw their forces to defend and focus on besieging them. After all, this night attack should have hurt them a lot. However, I feel that the other possibility is that they will do something desperate. If the other party's rations are too damaged and the rations team takes a long time to arrive, they may launch a large-scale attack and consume their own forces to exchange for a chess piece with us. What's an exchange? Li Qinqiu immediately asked. If the other party has a severe shortage of rations, for example, they only have enough rations for 100,000 people for 2 days, and the rations team takes 7 days to arrive, what should we do? Even if we cut everyone's rations by half, it won't be enough. When they are so hungry that they can't walk anymore, we will launch a large-scale attack. They won't even have a chance to retaliate. Since that's the case, we might as well consume more than half of their rations. It would be best if they can break into the city, but even if they can't, they can still consume our forces and die a worthy death. Even if their rations are insufficient, the remaining soldiers will be able to last until the rations team arrives. If the other party's rations are too damaged, they may do this. Exchanging their lives for ours is an exchange of chess pieces, Ren Baqin concluded. Li Qinqiu frowned and thought for a long time before slowly nodding his head. It's not impossible. If he were to put himself in the position of the other party's general, he would probably make the same choice if he had no other choice. Everyone discussed for a while. Seeing that it was already late at night, everyone went back to rest. Generally, both sides of a war had spies who could obtain a lot of useful information. However, in the war between Dayo and Great Xia, there were almost no spies in the other party's army. Therefore, all the information could only be based on speculation. Everyone in Dayo went back to rest, but the Great Xia barracks were brightly lit. They treated the wounded, put out the fires, counted the corpses, and calculated the losses until dawn. Wu Xingho sat in the big tent with an ashen face, motionless like a stone statue. The sound of hurried footsteps made him lift his eyelids. He looked at the scholar who hurried in and asked in a deep voice, "How is it?" The main barracks suffered 11,000 casualties, the east barracks suffered 23,000 casualties, and there are 392 soldiers left out of 876 in the Wu barracks. As for rations, the east barracks only had 2 days' worth of rations for 60,000 soldiers and lost 75%. The main barracks had 10 days' worth of rations for 170,000 soldiers and lost 60%. The west barracks didn't suffer any losses. How long can the remaining rations last? Wu Xingho asked. The west barracks still have 2 days' worth of rations for 60,000 soldiers. Together with the remaining rations in the East Barracks, it is enough for 140,000 soldiers to last a day. The remaining rations in the main barracks are enough for the army to last a little more than 4 days. That is to say, it is enough for 5 days. If the daily rations are halved, it can last for 10 days. However, this way, the soldiers won't be able to attack. How long until the rations arrive? Wu Xingho asked. 10 more days, the scholar replied softly. However, General Wen Yuan and General Zhao Xing should be able to transfer some over. It is more convenient for them to resupply at the border. Inform them. Wu Xingho said in a deep voice. Inform the soldiers to eat their fill. We will attack the city in 4 hours. Sir. The scholar was shocked. The soldiers didn't rest for the whole night. Why were they so anxious to attack the city today? We can't delay any longer. Wu Xingho said with an ugly expression. Do you know about the attack that the Wu barracks encountered yesterday? The scholar nodded his head. Coupled with the thing that attacked the rations last night and the explosive thing that they threw into the crowd, we don't know if the other party still has any tricks up their sleeves. We can't delay any longer. We have to take down Liao's city in one go or force them to use all their trump cards, no matter how great the casualties are. Wu Xingho said resolutely. To a general, as long as they revealed their trump cards, they would always be able to find a way to deal with them. Only the unknown was the most terrifying. This was because it was very likely that they would give you a head-on blow when you thought you were about to win. I didn't expect those barbarians to have such things in their hands. The scholar smiled bitterly. I didn't expect that either. Wu Xingho sighed softly. He felt that he was the barbarian now. These things can't be from Dayo. Someone must have given them to them. Capture that person, or kill him. General, do you know who it is? The scholar asked. In fact, he had some guesses in his heart. It should be that poison warrior. Yesterday, Chen Shi and Wu Ying went out together and saw someone controlling a weapon from afar. He should be the one in Liao City now. Moreover, it's better to kill the wrong person than to let him go, Wu Xingho said. Ren Baqian was just guessing the situation of the Great Xia army, so there were naturally many discrepancies. However, even though the reasons were different, Wu Xingho's decision was similar to what Ren Baqian had guessed. In the morning, Ren Baqian sat in the hall and ate breakfast with the Empress. There were rolls, noodle soup, and a big basin of meat the size of a washtub. He watched as the basin of meat disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Your Majesty, are you full? Ren Baqian asked softly when the basin was empty. The Empress tilted her head, thought for a while, and replied, I'm half full, but I want to take the lead in reducing my appetite. This way, the rations in the city can last for a few more days. Ren Baqian was speechless. The two of them chatted for a while before someone came to report that Great Xia was attacking the city. The two of them looked at each other. Ren Baqian pointed to himself and said, a wise man is always right. The Empress raised her head and thought for a while. There didn't seem to be anything wrong, but she still felt that something was wrong. In the afternoon, Ren Baqian confirmed his previous conjecture. The intensity of the enemy's attack was indeed much higher than before. There were Great Xia soldiers climbing up the city walls at almost every moment, and there were soldiers howling miserably as they fell from the top of the city walls. Another day passed, and the intensity of Great Xia's attack was still increasing. More than 100,000 soldiers took turns to attack, and the three sides of the city walls were in a constant battle from morning to night. Ren Baqian walked to the small hall of the city commander's residence and saw Li Qianqiu, who was issuing orders inside. He waited for Li Qianqiu to finish talking to someone before going forward to ask. Can you still hold on? Another 100,000 of them will be fine, Li Qianqiu replied indifferently. Renbochin nodded and said, "If the pressure is too great, use the remaining explosives." "Didn't you use them the night before yesterday?" Li Qianqiu was puzzled. "I still have one box," Renbochin replied. The 300 explosive tubes were packed into 2 boxes. He took out half of them when he blew up the catapult that day and used them during the night attack. Now, there was only 1 box left. "Men, follow me to search the houses." When Li Qianqiu heard this, he immediately stood up from behind the table and strode out, calling out to the others as he walked. Chapter 359. 2 days later, Renbochin brought the box back to Deo. It was just past noon. Renbochin carefully put the box away and strolled to the main hall of the city commander's residence. A group of people were hurrying in and out. The Empress was sitting at the seat of honor, and no one knew what she was thinking about. "Your Majesty, how's the situation?" Renbochin walked to her and asked. When the Empress heard his voice, her eyes finally focused. She first looked at his face, reached out to take the bag that he was carrying, rummaged through it, and put it beside her feet. Then, he said, "Great Xia has been attacking for an entire night. Over the past 2 days, Great Xia has lost at least 30,000 men. There are also 1,500 casualties in the city. Now, the winged cavalry warriors that are left in the city have gone up the city walls to defend." This was the biggest weakness of the aboriginals. Even though they were strong, their numbers were too small. 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers had to defend the city walls in 3 directions. Excluding the few guards at the southern city wall, there were actually less than 2,000 soldiers in each direction, and they had to withstand the continuous attacks from Great Xia. The number of casualties gradually increased, and the pressure on the remaining soldiers increased. This was expected. Great Xia used a forceful attack, and both sides suffered huge losses. Now, it was up to who could endure. Renbochin thought about it and felt that Great Xia shouldn't be able to endure. If they could, he would make them unable to. Renbochin accompanied the Empress in the main hall until it was night time, but Great Xia still had no intention of withdrawing. It was obvious that Great Xia's 100,000 soldiers were taking turns to attack until the thousands of aboriginal soldiers in Liao City couldn't hold on anymore. After dinner, Renbochin went to the top of the city wall with the accompaniment of the guards. As soon as he went up, he was choked by the smell of blood and the battle cries around him. Renbochin saw 7 or 8 huge scaling ladders being pushed to the side of the city wall. Those scaling ladders were like mobile buildings. At the top was a platform with dozens of Great Xia soldiers standing on it. When they were very close, they would jump over and attack. Behind the scaling ladders, there were still countless soldiers climbing up the ladder without stopping. "Kill!" Dozens of Great Xia soldiers jumped over and roared with a sinister look on their faces. Most of them only managed to shout the word "kill" before they were cut down and fell to the bottom of the city wall. Only a few of the more powerful aboriginals were able to deal with the aboriginal warriors. A winged cavalry warrior appeared from the side. The long saber in his hand was fast and ruthless, and he managed to kill a few Great Xia soldiers in a few moves. He then brandished his long saber to knock down a few arrows that were shot at him. Another batch of Great Xia soldiers jumped onto the cloud chariot. At this moment, the city walls were filled with torches from top to bottom, brightly illuminating the area dozens of meters below the city walls. There were corpses, damaged military equipment, and a dense mass of Great Xia soldiers below the city walls. Boom! There was a loud bang, and a cloud of fire erupted from the bottom of a ladder in the distance. The ladder was blown up, and the Great Xia soldiers on it screamed miserably as they fell. Needless to say, this was the work of the explosives. Otherwise, it would take a lot of effort to destroy such a huge ladder. But now, a tube of dynamite could easily solve the problem. Then, there were a few more explosions. After all the ladders within his field of vision were destroyed, the aboriginal soldiers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Sir Ren. A winged cavalry warrior wiped the blood off his face, cupped his fists at Renbochin, and sat by the wall to rest. Do the Great Xia soldiers still have any military equipment? Renbochin asked. It wouldn't be easy for the other party to make such a huge ladder, right? I hope not, that winged cavalry warrior mumbled. Since yesterday morning, they had been fighting continuously for 18 hours. Even though they were earth will experts, they still felt tired. However, imagination was always good. Not long after, the Great Xia soldiers rushed up again. This time, it wasn't the Great Xia soldiers who were already exhausted. Instead, it was the elite soldiers who had rested sufficiently and rested for a full 10 hours. They carried ladders that looked like ladders and rushed up again. Damn it! Renbochin cursed. This time, he had brought a lot of anti-infantry jumping mines and was prepared to bury them outside the city walls. However, if the other party didn't withdraw, how could he bury them? He couldn't possibly bury them on the city walls, right? After walking around the 3 city walls, Renbochin hurriedly returned to the city commander's residence, took out his Italian cannon, and went directly to the bottom of the city walls. If the other party didn't withdraw, he would blow them up until they did. This time, he had brought back a total of 40 mortar shells, which were still steel ball incendiary bombs. He also brought 50 Type 72 anti-infantry landmines, which had a total of 650 destructive shrapnel fragments. If they were to explode from a height of 1 meter, the destructive power would be even greater than a mortar shell. He took a look at the city wall. It was dark in the distance, and he couldn't see clearly. However, he remembered the areas below the city where there were more people and where there were fewer people. Then, he quickly ran down to adjust the angle of the mortar. A moment later, there was a bang, and smoke was emitted from the muzzle of the mortar. Dozens of seconds later, a ball of fire immediately exploded outside the city. Even the surrounding Great Xia soldiers were swept away, and 2 ladders were directly destroyed. Oh yeah. Renbochin's voice didn't sound very happy. Instead, it sounded dull. Sir Ren has made a move. The aboriginal soldiers cheered. Looking at this posture, they knew that Renbochin had personally made a move. Besides him, no one else could use this thing. The destructive power of those black tube explosions wasn't as great as this one. He adjusted the muzzle and fired again. Boom! The cheers on the city wall were louder. Sir Ren, I want to bear your children. Such a voice came with the wind. Renbochin's face twitched. Which B** shouted this? Do you believe that I'll beat you to death? When the 3rd mortar shell was fired, Renbochin continued to adjust the angle. When the mortar was fired, there were people cheering on the city wall, but after dozens of seconds, the cheers suddenly stopped. A dud. Renbochin had this thought. He stuffed the mortar shell into the barrel and fired again. Boom! Then, he adjusted the angle and fired again. This time, there was still no sound of an explosion. This time, Renbochin immediately realized that something was wrong. It would be understandable if there was a problem with one mortar shell. However, there was a problem with both shells, so it wasn't a matter of probability anymore. Sir Ren, that thing of yours has been shot onto the wall, a winged cavalry warrior hurriedly shouted as he ran down from the city wall. Renbochin thought, how can you say that? He also knew that this wasn't the time to stare. Upon hearing this, he immediately knew what was going on, so he quickly got up and ran up the city wall. Where is it? Sir Ren, follow me. That winged cavalry warrior ran along the city wall with Renbochin, dodging the swords and sabers that were slashing at him from time to time. Renbochin twisted left and right and weaved his way through the shadows of the swords and sabers. He looked down from the top of the wall where the winged cavalry warrior had stopped and saw a dark-colored mortar shell nailed to the wall by a long arrow. It was still swaying with the wind like an hour hand. So ruthless. Although Renbochin had already guessed it, he was still a little surprised to see this scene. This was a mortar shell. It could travel hundreds of meters in 1 second. Furthermore, it was still night time. Where did this expert come from? Sir, be careful. Sherhu pushed Renbochin, and a long arrow whistled through the air as it brushed past Renbochin's shoulder and disappeared. Do you know where he is? I'll blow him up. Renbochin was lying on the ground with cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Chapter 360. Son of AB*TCH, where are you? Come out, I will definitely kill you. Renbochin was at the corner of the city wall. He quietly poked his head out and carefully looked into the darkness in the distance. He didn't notice that the antenna on his head had completely exposed him. This was the corner between the east and south walls, and it was one of the few relatively peaceful places. The battle cries came from a dozen meters away from him, but he pretended not to hear them. Pay attention to the direction of the arrow and where exactly it was shot from. Renbochin exhorted Sherhu. Sherhu also had a night vision device on his head and was looking outside curiously. He didn't expect to see people in this way with this device, and it was very novel to him. Inform the others to fire. Renbochin said to the people behind him. He had already adjusted the angle of the mortar just now, and the people who stayed there only needed to put the shell in. After a while, a bang sound was heard from inside the city. Renbochin stared at the sea of people below. Although he couldn't see the person clearly, he could more or less see some movements. He just needed to find the person who drew the bow and knocked the arrow at that time. The movement of the bowstring wasn't small, and it was very likely that he would be found. Boom! The shell directly exploded outside the city wall, and a corner of the night vision device was dyed red. At that moment, he saw at least 3 people do the same action, but none of them hit the target. Could it be one of them? Renbochin thought to himself and resisted the urge to shoot. He quietly slipped down the city wall, adjusted the angle of the mortar, hit on top of the city wall, and fired. Bang! Renbochin carefully looked at the figure in the darkness and cursed in his heart. This time, at least 10 people did the same action. Great Xia didn't only have one godly archer, so it was impossible to find the person. When Renbochin thought of this, he moved the gun rack to a position, held the trigger, and fired. It didn't matter if it was the person or not, he would just shoot first. The first 2 archers didn't even have time to react and were shot into rags. The third archer fiercely leapt backwards, then broke into a run. An expert. An expert must die. It was as if Renbochin had found the person he was looking for. He didn't care about the others at all as he fired a long metal dragon at the figure with the machine gun. However, there were too many people outside in the dark. Renbochin could only see the color blocks formed by the heat emitted by the human body. With just a few flashes, it was difficult for him to find him among the crowd. After emptying a chain of ammunition in the general direction, Renbochin allowed Sherhu to carry his spear and descend the city wall. There were still many things to do at night. She couldn't keep wasting time with him. After Renbochin fired a few artillery shells, there were a few gaps in the attacks outside the eastern city wall. This allowed the soldiers on this side of the wall to more or less take a breather. Moreover, most of the scaling ladders had been destroyed, so the intensity of the attack was still acceptable. Some of the soldiers could even take turns to rest. Renbochin used this opportunity to fire 8 consecutive cannons in the direction of the north gate. 2 of the cannons were hit, and one of them collided with the wall before falling to the ground and exploding. The other one was directly hung on the wall like the two on the east side. After these few cannons were fired, the great Xia soldiers outside the city wall were immediately wiped out. More than half of the scaling ladders had also disappeared. After going through all three directions, Great Xia's attack finally weakened. After another hour, they finally sounded the gong to withdraw. Without the scaling ladders as a siege weapon, it was useless even if they had a large number of people. They could only speed up cutting down the trees outside to make more equipment in order to organize the next wave of attack. When the Great Xia army withdrew, many of the soldiers directly sat in a pool of blood, leaned against the wall, and fell into a deep sleep. After fighting continuously for so long, even a man made of iron couldn't withstand it. Renbochin once again led the guards up the city wall. "Take that down." Renbochin pointed at the artillery shell that was nailed to the wall below and said to Shihu, "It won't explode, right?" Shihu knew the power of this thing as he had seen it too many times in the past 2 days. "Just be careful not to touch the front." Renbochin waved his hand. He had already asked about this thing. This kind of artillery shell had 2 safeties. One was opened when the bottom was fired, and the other was the fuse at the top. A certain amount of force had to be exerted before the fuse would explode. As long as one of the conditions wasn't met, it would be safe. Not to mention being pierced by an arrow, even if it was hit by a tracer bullet, it wouldn't explode so easily. Renbochin asked someone to find a few pieces of cloth, cut the arrow shaft, and pulled it out. Then, he wrapped the artillery shell and asked someone to carefully put it aside. The next time Great Xia attacked, they would directly throw it down. Under such circumstances, he didn't know whether it could still explode or not. Even if it couldn't explode, it could still smash someone to death. Then, he carefully sized up the long arrow that was cut off from the artillery shell. It was made of wood, had a white feather tail, and a fine iron arrowhead at the front. After looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't figure out anything. Then, he passed the 2 short arrows to Shihu. "Sir, these are arrows from the same person," Shihu said after sizing them up. "How do you know?" Renbochin asked curiously. "Some archers will leave a mark on the arrow, which means that this person was killed by himself. Here, there is a carving mark on both arrows," Shihu explained as he passed the tail of the arrow to Renbochin and pointed at the tail. As expected, Renbochin looked in the direction that Shihu pointed. Indeed, there was a small pattern at the bottom of the arrow shaft. It looked like a simple flower. "Alright, if he didn't die, he can be considered lucky." Renbochin waved his hand and no longer cared about the archer. He returned to the city commander's residence and moved out the box containing the landmines. Then, he hurriedly led his men out of the city and buried 10 landmines in an area that was about 100 to 200 meters away from the city. Type 72 Anti-Infantry Bouncing Mine. After being stepped on, the grenade would jump 1 to 2 meters before exploding. The explosive power was not strong, but it contained 650 shrapnel fragments that could cause a large number of casualties within a radius of 14 meters. This type of landmine wasn't meant to kill, but to injure. After all, an injured person needed 2 people to carry him away and also needed someone to take care of him. Compared to killing him directly, it was more of a burden to the other party. Furthermore, the injured still needed to eat rations. This was also the reason why Renbochin brought the landmines back to Earth. Did the other party want to trade? In that case, Renbochin would create a large number of injured people. They couldn't fight, had to send people to take care of them, and had to consume rations. Be careful not to step on it. If anyone steps on it, they will probably be buried in the ground. Renbochin placed the landmines into the pit, covered it with soil from both sides, and emphasized again and again. After hearing this, the guards and winged cavalry warriors around him immediately kept quiet out of fear. Even an earth-will expert would be seriously injured and die if they weren't careful with these things that Rinpoche used. Each and every one of the strong men walked like cats and didn't even breathe loudly. In fact, this type of landmine would only start operating after being buried for a period of time. This was to prevent the people who laid the landmines from accidentally stepping on them. At the same time, the so-called landmines weren't like those that wouldn't jump out and explode if one stepped on or was pressed down by something. As long as one stepped on it, the fuse would be ignited. Even if one didn't move, it would explode in a short period of time, but the damage to the surroundings would be smaller. Following which, he also buried 10 landmines in the north and west of the city. Rinpoche then brought his men back to the city and got them to find more than 10 pieces of white cloth. He used chicken claws to write on them, "Be careful where you step." Sir, aren't we reminding them? What if they find out? Sherhu rubbed his head and asked, "How far can we see this cloth?" Rinpoche squinted at him and asked. Upon hearing this, Sherhu turned around and ran into the distance. He used the light from the lantern to take a closer look before running back and saying, "During the day, it should be about 30 to 40 meters, right? Now, it can't be seen clearly from about 30 meters away. How far have we buried it?" Rinpoche was exasperated that Sherhu didn't meet his expectations. About 50 to 60 meters. Sherhu counted with his fingers. Isn't that enough? The other party will first step on the landmines and kill and injure a lot of people. Then, when they see the cloth on the city wall, won't they pay more attention to where they step? Even if they don't pay attention, they won't be able to stop their imagination from running wild, right? Then, we didn't bury it under the city wall, and they will find out soon. Sherhu continued to ask. He still didn't understand Rinpoche's intention. Rinpoche crossed his arms and said with a serious face, "I'm just scaring them." Sherhu was speechless. The next day, Great Xia rested for an entire day. On the third day, they carried a bunch of scaling ladders out to continue attacking the city. At present, the large scaling ladders that looked like moving buildings were no longer there. Instead, they were all scaling ladders that looked like ladders that could be carried directly up the city wall by a few people. The army first lined up in a formation and approached Liao City with a murderous aura. When Rinpoche heard that the Great Xia army had left their barracks, he hurriedly rushed to the city wall with the Empress, Li Qianqiu, and the others. They only saw the neat army nearing Liao City after leaving the barracks. At the very front were the soldiers with shields, and behind them were the archers and the spearmen. Between the two rows of soldiers, there were a few people carrying scaling ladders. As far as the eye could see, there were at least 40 scaling ladders, and there were even more scaling ladders coming out from the barracks. Are they cutting down our trees to make these scaling ladders? Rinpoche suddenly thought of this. They are also cutting down our trees to make fires and cook. Li Qianqiu said faintly. Does this count as eating, using, and even attacking us? Rinpoche asked again. Li Qianqiu's expression froze as he had never considered this question before. After hearing what Rinpoche said, it seemed to be the case. All of a sudden, he was in a bad mood. We are almost there. Rinpoche and Li Qianqiu chatted for a while and saw that the Great Xia army was already nearing the farthest mine that was buried yesterday. Li Qianqiu knew that Rinpoche ran out to bury something at night, but he didn't know what it was. At this moment, after hearing what Rinpoche said, Li Qianqiu focused his attention and observed carefully. When a row of soldiers stepped over the first mine, the second row also stepped over it. Miraculously, they didn't step on it. However, an archer in the third row made a slight click sound when he stepped on it. A second later, when he lifted his foot, the mine directly bounced off the ground. Boom! Along with flames, countless steel balls and shrapnel were shot in all directions. In addition to the people who were closest to the mine being blown up and turned into sieves, many people were also injured by the random shrapnel. The Great Xia army's battle formation suddenly became chaotic. Then, the second mine, the third mine, everyone at the top of the city wall looked at the gradually chaotic Great Xia army and immediately felt refreshed. Principal Ren, what kind of treasure is it this time? Li Qianqiu turned his head and asked. Jumping mine. Ren Baqian replied with 2 words. He just realized something very interesting. The Great Xia army's shield soldiers were in front while the crossbowmen and archers were in the back. This was to prevent the aboriginal army from attacking and to cover them with a rain of arrows at the first instance. However, at this time, almost all the mines exploded within the crossbowmen and archers, causing the greatest damage to the crossbowmen and archers who didn't have much protection. Although the number of casualties wasn't too high, there were still about 300 to 400 people. Most of them were injured, especially in the lower 3 parts of the army, which were below the waist. The Great Xia army fell into chaos before they even reached the bottom of the city wall. After a full 2 hours, the Great Xia army continued to advance. At this time, the people at the front with good eyesight could clearly see what was written on the white cloth on the city wall. However, something that Rinpoche didn't expect happened. The Great Xia army didn't seem to see it and didn't panic at all. Chapter 361. Is the burial done? Rinpoche raised his head, looked at the Great Xia barracks not far away, and asked softly. My lord, it's done. Let's go. Rinpoche led everyone away with a wave of his hand, leaving behind only a landmine. Rinpoche buried another mortar in the distance. Then, he set up the mortar in another location and fired at the eastern and northern barracks of the enemy. After that, he packed up and returned to the city to sleep. Rinpoche and the rest went back to sleep, but Great Xia was almost tormented to death. In the middle of the night, there was a sudden explosion in the barracks. Furthermore, it landed in between a few tents. Not to mention the number of casualties, Great Xia thought that Dayo had come to raid their barracks again. One after another, the soldiers of Great Xia grabbed their weapons and rushed out. After receiving it, he waited for a long time before realizing that the other party had only fired 1 shell. After waiting for an hour, everyone in the camp believed that the other party wouldn't come again, so they went back to sleep. Early the next morning, Great Xia stepped on a landmine the moment they got into formation. Everyone immediately put their eyes on the ground and carefully moved forward. They only heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that there was nothing wrong after walking for 100 meters. Before they could even exhale, they were suppressed by another explosion. The third day. There was a river north of the Great Xia barracks. The river was 100 meters wide, and the current was rather rapid. Usually, the Great Xia soldiers would collect water from this river for daily use. This place wasn't far from the barracks. In the past, this place was considered safe as the aboriginals were all holed up in Liao City. Thus, everyone could come here to collect water without worry. One morning, there were 2 explosions by the river. Then, a group of servants shouted loudly and carried a dozen or so people back. A few of them could not be saved, and the rest were all covered in blood. On the 4th day, when the people of Great Xia left the camp, they felt that there was something under their feet. They wanted to stop for half a day after every step they took. At this moment, they finally understood what "watch your step" meant. Although most of the soldiers were illiterate, there were always some who could read. That day, the words on the white cloth hanging on the city wall attracted a lot of people's attention. After the soldiers returned to camp that night, the news spread throughout the camp. In addition, there would be explosions in a certain place every day. After a few days, the soldiers of Great Xia began to walk with caution. However, there were no explosions that day, and the soldiers heaved a sigh of relief when they attacked the city. It didn't matter if it was a real fight, but not knowing when something would suddenly jump up and explode under their feet would always make them a little nervous. They are at their wits' end, Wu Xingho said in the Great Xia barracks with a relaxed look on his face. How does the great general know? The scholar put on a studious pose. Apart from that night's attack, they only engaged in small skirmishes after that. They used less and less of those powerful weapons. Although there was something that would explode when buried in the ground, there weren't many of them. A few days ago, they encountered 10 of them in each direction, but in the last 2 days, there were fewer and fewer. Today, there wasn't even one. Moreover, no matter where they got this thing from, with the power and precision of this weapon, it would definitely require a skilled craftsman to make it, and there wouldn't be too many of them. It can be used to harass or attack a small number of troops, but when the two armies are facing each other, it can only hurt a few more people and delay the attack. Wu Xingho stated his judgment, and the scholar immediately flattered him. Great General is brilliant. Wu Xingho waved his hand. You and I have known each other for many years, so you don't have to do this. Whatever I can think of, you can too. If they used more weapons at the beginning, I would have a headache. But now, it seems that there aren't many of them, so I don't have to worry too much. Great General, don't forget that the other party has a weapon that can spit out countless small iron balls. That weapon is slightly more powerful than the others, and even a high-level Earth Will expert would find it difficult to escape. The more powerful the weapon, the greater the restrictions, Wu Xingho said resolutely. The iron balls that the other party spit out are specially manufactured and of excellent quality. Even the skilled craftsmen of Great Xia would need a lot of time to make them. The speed of this weapon is also very fast, and a few can be shot out in an instant. Using this kind of weapon consumes a lot of specially made iron balls. From what I can see, the other party took a long time to accumulate so many. After using it a few times, even if there are more, there won't be many left. What the Great General said is right. At this moment, Renbao was looking at a house in Shanghai. He was accompanied by a lady in her 30s. She wore glasses and looked very professional. She spoke very professionally, but Renbao felt that she was sizing him up. This house was found by Renbao's assistant, Shen Feng. It was 2.5 stories, about 600 square meters, 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 bathrooms. The second floor had a large balcony and a garden of more than 1,000 square meters. There were 2 swimming pools in the garden and indoors, and a semi-subterranean garage. Upon seeing this house, Renbao's first thought was to bring the Empress here to swim. The Empress definitely wouldn't go to crowded places by the sea, but there was still a possibility of swimming here. In addition, there were many rooms, and the garage was also big. In the future, weapons and ammunition could be directly stored in this house, which was very convenient. Furthermore, this house was exquisitely renovated. Even though the style wasn't to his liking, it wasn't to his dislike either. The best thing was that he could move in just by carrying his luggage. The only thing that Renbao didn't like was that it was too deserted. The palace was deserted enough, and there were more houses than people. Most of the time, he was alone in such a big house. It was so boring. Is it possible to connect all the rooms? I live alone, and I always feel that there are people in the other rooms. I lack a sense of security. If you can connect all the rooms and have a panoramic view, this house won't have any shortcomings, Renbao said sincerely. After hearing Renbao's words, the real estate agent's expression immediately froze. Why do I feel that there are people in the other rooms? Are there people or ghosts? Lack a sense of security. Are you here to cause trouble? Sir, the feng shui here is excellent, and there is absolutely no problem. Furthermore, I can introduce you to a master who is very famous in Shanghai. You don't have to worry about these things. I didn't mean it that way. Renbao waved his hand lightly. It's a psychological effect, do you understand? I lack a sense of security, and I like to stay in a place with a panoramic view. There are so many rooms here, and I feel uncomfortable. If you want to hire a psychiatrist, it might be better for me to hire a psychiatrist. If not for the fact that he didn't look like an ordinary person, that woman would have thrown the book in her hand on his face. If you don't like big houses, why are you looking at villas? Renbochin had been in Dayo's court for a long time and had dealings with the higher-ups in the country. He naturally had an imposing manner that this woman didn't dare to offend. Sir, perhaps you can look at other houses. Our company has many houses that are suitable for someone of your status. The woman changed the topic. Status? Renbochin smiled kindly at her, like a big bad wolf seeing Little Red Riding Hood. What do you think of my status? Not an ordinary person. The woman made a turn and smiled respectfully. Would an ordinary person come to look at a villa worth more than 30 million yuan? However, she didn't dare to guess his identity. Although she felt that he was a rich man, she might offend him if she guessed wrongly. If he was narrow-minded, she would be in big trouble. Most importantly, Renbochin had an imposing manner that made her feel pressured. She also felt that this person beside her was somewhat dangerous. Good taste. Renbochin gave a thumbs up and laughed heartily. This one, Renbochin said as he clapped his hands. The woman's heart trembled when she heard this. A house worth more than 30 million yuan was bought just like that. She quickly calculated how much commission she could get this time. Wait a minute. Renbochin gestured to her again. Then, he called Yang Sen, Director Yang. Mr. Ren, what's the matter? Yang Sen trembled a little when he heard Renbochin's call. Recently, he had been dealing with Renbochin every 3 to 5 days. After hearing Renbochin talk about nuclear bombs, white phosphorus bombs, and napalm bombs from time to time, he didn't want to answer Renbochin's call anymore. My house has been flooded and I am homeless now. I happened to look at a house. It's not expensive and only costs about 40 million yuan. However, I don't have enough money in my pocket. I would like to ask you for a loan of 50 million yuan. Together with the renovation fee. Yang Sen was speechless. Director Yang can't handle such a small matter, can you? This time, I have brought something good for you. Renbochin laughed. Wait a minute, let me ask for instructions. Yang Sen hung up the phone after he finished speaking. Renbochin hummed a tune. Actually, he hadn't spent much money recently. He still had about 100 million yuan left with the loan from the nation and his original 20 million yuan. However, if someone else could foot the bill, why should he fork out his own money? Chapter 362. The things that Renbochin brought back this time were actually the products of poverty. They were bone arrows used by the winged cavalry. As Dayo couldn't afford to use iron arrowheads, these bone arrows were very hard and stable. There were many arrows made from these bones when hunting in the mountains. When Renbochin came back, he brought a few with him to the laboratory on Earth. Actually, he had another idea, which he only thought of when he came back. He wanted to bring back the corpse of an earth will expert. Presumably, he would be able to obtain a lot of important things from their corpses, including directions for training. This was something that he needed. After understanding the progress of the laboratory, he realized that there wasn't much progress on the saber. However, he heard another piece of news. Some of the people on Earth were practicing the martial arts he brought back, and the fastest ones had already reached the man-will level. Even he was surprised by this speed. However, it wasn't that difficult to understand after thinking about it. The so-called man-will level was when the body had reached a certain level of training and blood essence was transformed into qi. Some of the elite soldiers and even martial artists on Earth shouldn't be far from this step. There were definitely many such elites among the people in China who chose to practice martial arts. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for them to reach the man-will level in a short period of time with sufficient logistical support. Fortunately, he never felt that the people on Earth were a threat. Therefore, he was happy to see it happen. The more he analyzed and understood martial arts through modern technology, the more helpful it would be for him. 2 days later, that villa became Renbachian's. There were 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, 2 swimming pools, and a huge garage. Furthermore, the forest park was next to it, and the air was good. He didn't have to smell the pungent and turbid air every time he came back. Recently, Renbachian's nose had been itching, and he suspected that he was going to get rhinitis. Renbachian couldn't help but shudder at the thought of his mucus hanging from his nose every day. That scene was simply unbearable. To Renbachian, the greatest significance was that he would have a place to store his firearms in the future. Secondly, he might be able to tempt the Empress to swim. Swimming pool, sunshine, bikini, and just thinking about it made him a little excited. As for the 1,800 square meters of garden, he didn't really care about it. The garden in the palace was much bigger than this. This place is too spacious, Renbachian said as he walked. Behind him was Shenfeng, who was wearing unisex clothes. Change this place into a supermarket. Renbachian opened a door and said to Shenfeng. Although Shenfeng was usually expressionless, she was a little shocked when she heard this request. Setting up a supermarket in your own villa, your brain circuit is too strange. The surrounding shelves are filled with all kinds of snacks, candies, chocolates, popcorn, potato chips, yam tablets. There are 2 freezers in the middle for all kinds of ice cream. Shenfeng took out a recording pen and recorded everything that Renbachian said. Her face was bright and full of expression. Actually, when I was young, my biggest wish was to open a supermarket at home. Renbachian couldn't help but reminisce about his lost childhood. My second wish is to open a barbecue shop, so prepare the barbecue equipment for me as well. Boss, what should we do with the things here? Shenfeng asked as she pointed at the cabinet, bed, desk, and chair in the room. Up to you. If you like it, you can take it. If not, you can dispose of it. Also, get me a housekeeper to clean the place once a day, including the pool. The garage and my bedroom are off limits unless I let you. Lastly, when I'm not around and there's no one here, will there be any problems? Renbachian asked after thinking for a while. The security here is very good, so don't worry, boss, Shenfeng immediately replied. With Renbachian's identity, even if he lived in the most chaotic place, there would be people who would make the security there very good. That's good. Renbachian nodded. He was well aware of Shenfeng's identity and had already guessed it during the recruitment. When he was recruiting, 11 out of the 10 people who were sent to him were sent by certain departments. They wouldn't let go of this opportunity. That night, a truck arrived at Renbachian's new villa and moved a few boxes into his garage. Renbachian opened the boxes and checked them before tying them up again and bringing them back to Deo. The next morning, when the Great Xia army was attacking the city, they saw that banners with words were hung on the city wall again. The Great Xia army at the front didn't pay much attention to it. The casualties these few days had already shown that very few of those who rushed up the city wall survived. If it weren't for the fact that these Great Xia soldiers were well trained and that there was a law enforcement team behind them, they would have already started to flee. Even so, there were people who took advantage of the night to escape over the past 2 days. However, they ended up being hung on the pillars as a warning to the public. Under such circumstances, it was better for them to seize the last moment to look at the place where they were about to be buried than to care about what was written on that piece of paper. Believe in Dafu, it can save my life. Dafu must ensure that I come down from the city wall alive, a soldier muttered while holding his amulet in his hand. What's the use of believing in that? I'm afraid that we won't be able to come down alive today. A soldier who was missing an ear sighed. He was the first batch of soldiers to attack the city today. If we were attacking other places, even if we climbed up the city wall, there would still be a chance to retreat or directly attack the city wall when the situation isn't good. There would always be hope. However, this group of barbarians basically won't be able to come down alive after going up. Another soldier's voice wasn't loud, and only 2 or 3 people around him could hear him clearly. His words also represented the words of the others. If there was some hope in attacking other places, there was no hope at all in Liao City. Perhaps Liao City would be attacked in a few days, but not today. At the very least, Liao City's defense hadn't weakened since yesterday. What they cared about was that they were going to die in battle on this piece of land in a while. Some officers were curious about what was written on the white cloth on the city wall. When the distance was close enough, the few literate people could finally see the words on it. Be careful of the top. Previously, they were careful of the bottom. This time, they were careful of the top. Even without Rinpoche's reminder, everyone knew to be careful, but it was useless to be careful. Fortunately, the other party's weapons had been used less and less recently. Wu Xingho wasn't the only one who felt that those strange weapons in Liao City were about to be used up. In less than 15 minutes, Wu Xingho received the news. Be careful of the top. Subconsciously, he thought of the things that had fallen from the sky and exploded. They are preparing to take out their last weapons. Wu Xingho laughed. Since the other party didn't use them yesterday, he knew that they didn't have much left. Today's banner was just to dazzle people's eyes. Continue to attack the city and get the master archers ready. Wu Xingho waved his hand. Following his order, a loud and clear howl sounded from the Great Xia army. Kill! 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 The Great Xia soldiers raised their spears and shouted 3 times. Then, they carried the newly made ladder up the city. Watch carefully how to use this little thing. Rinpoche held a small melon in his hand. He demonstrated it to the more than 20 winged cavalry warriors around him. First, hold down the handle here and then pull out the ring. Remember, the ring must be pulled out and the handle must be held down. In a while, if anything goes wrong, I will let him know what it means to flutter in the wind. If he doesn't die, I will strip him naked and hang him in the city. I will get someone to draw an elephant for him and hang him there until the Great Xia army retreats. Then, I will pull him back to Lan City and hang him on top of the city wall. If you want to show off your size, you can consider doing it wrong on purpose. The winged cavalry warriors looked at Rinpoche and smirked. After the ring is pulled out, continue to hold down the handle and throw it toward the place where there are a lot of enemy soldiers. Rinpoche continued to speak and threw the small melon down the city wall. It was originally high up, and he had great strength. He threw it 100 meters away and happened to fall under the feet of a group of Great Xia soldiers who were protecting the ladder and rushing up. Boom! A group of people had just run over with the ladder. Following the explosion, half of them fell down, and many of the remaining people were also injured. The 82-2 grenade weighed 260 grams, which was 250 kilograms. It contained 62 grams of high explosives and 1,600 small steel balls with a diameter of 3 millimeters. The shell of the grenade could also form more than 330 3-gram fragments with a destructive radius of 6 meters. Although the power of the explosives wasn't strong enough, the number of fragments and small steel balls that exploded at an initial speed of 1,400 meters was enough to turn the surrounding people into sieves and cause a large number of casualties. This time, Rinpoche brought a total of 600 of these grenades, 30 60mm anti-personnel incendiary shells, and 30 bouncing mines. At present, Rinpoche had 600 grenades, 42 incendiary shells, and 38 bouncing mines. Each person will take 10 grenades and use them when the enemy attacks in a group. This will immediately disrupt the momentum of the enemy's attack. After Renbochin gave his instructions, more than 20 winged cavalry warriors used their shadowless hands like more than 20,000 armed guanyin. In the blink of an eye, 2 boxes were emptied. Then, they spread their legs and disappeared. Chapter 363. Great Xia had just launched their attack and arrived at the foot of the city wall when they were showered with muskmelons. Dozens of grenades were thrown, and more than half of the attacking troops collapsed. There were all kinds of screams below the city wall. Even though some of the Great Xia soldiers didn't die, their bodies were like seeds, and they probably wouldn't live for long. Some of them were slightly better off and had some injuries on their bodies. Believe in Dafu, protect the whole family, and obtain eternal life. A Great Xia soldier fell to the ground with one hand holding the amulet on his chest. His eyes were filled with ecstasy. His injuries weren't light or serious. There were many wounds on his body, but they weren't in vital areas. He definitely wouldn't be able to fight on the battlefield, but he wouldn't leave behind too much of a problem. After recuperating for 10 days to half a month, he would be a good man again. In the largest tent of the Great Xia barracks, Wu Xingho smashed the table in front of him with an ashen face. Just yesterday, he said that the other party had exhausted their limited tricks. Just now, he said that the other party didn't have any new tricks, but the other party immediately took out a new type of weapon. Although the method of killing was very similar, from the soldier's description, it was different from the previous one. It was much smaller and less powerful. There were more people on the battlefield, but fewer people died. However, there were hundreds of injured soldiers. Now, there were more than 3,000 injured soldiers in the barracks. All of them were pierced by the shrapnel of the other party's weapon, and many soldiers were infected. Now, Wu Xingho hoped that when the rations were delivered, he would be able to bring these injured soldiers back. Leaving them here would affect the morale. Continue to attack. I want to see how many they have. Wu Xingho gritted his teeth. He didn't believe that the other party still had many such exquisite weapons. In addition, get the scouts to pay attention to the south. If the convoy comes over, inform me immediately. Very soon, the sounds of fighting and weapons colliding could be heard from Liao City. However, every time the Great Xia soldiers reached a certain level, a few winged cavalry warriors would throw a wave of grenades down to interrupt the subsequent attacks. Then, they would slowly clear up the enemy troops on the city wall. After a few times of this, the Great Xia soldiers almost vomited blood. How was this a siege? It was simply a suicide mission. Of course, such a consumption wasn't small. Before evening, the 300 grenades were used up. Yun Nation, Qingfeng City. Ziheng, I am irreconcilable with the Xia Kingdom. After a strong man entered the inn with Gu Ziheng, he began to curse with a sullen face. Renbochin was very familiar with these two men as they were the shopkeepers of the caravans that he learned marketing from. Not bad. You guys are lucky to be able to come back, said another middle-aged man, Gu Ziheng. My things and money are all gone. I only brought back 2,000 taels of gold ingots. If I didn't run fast enough, I wouldn't even have brought these back. The person who spoke was called Tang Feng, and he was the shopkeeper of the merchant caravan that went to Great Xia previously. When Great Xia and the Aboriginals were at war, he didn't receive any news. However, he soon felt that something was amiss. One night, he discovered that someone was following him, and he immediately captured that person. After finding out that it was someone from the military, he immediately felt that something was amiss. Out of Xia and Ren of the soldiers of Xia of the with the caravans of. However, before he could escape the city, the soldiers from the military caught up with him. Tang Feng and his subordinates fought a great battle with the soldiers of the military. In the end, out of more than 50 subordinates, only about 20 people followed him from the border between Great Xia and the Yun nation to the Yun nation and found Gu Ziheng. Speaking of which, he also felt guilty. If he hadn't been more vigilant after traveling all these years, he probably wouldn't have been able to return this time. Unfortunately, at least 200,000 taels of silver had been lost. The 2,000 taels of gold ingots he had brought back was equivalent to 20,000 taels of silver. In other words, he had only brought back 1/10 of what he had brought back. But at that time, they only had this amount of gold on hand. The rest of the silver was too much. If they wanted to take the silver with them, they wouldn't be able to run back. When Her Majesty fights back, you can naturally take it back even more aggressively, Gu Ziheng said while taking a sip of the tea leaves. How's the situation in the Yun nation? Tang Feng asked. I'm more familiar with this place than you are. In my opinion, they will quarrel for a while. Gu Ziheng smiled. The Yun nation was somewhat different from Great Xia and Dayo. The Yun nation was more like an aggregation of all the cities. The ruling power of the imperial court was relatively low. On the other hand, the cities in the Yun nation were governed by warlords. Each warlord had the power to decide life and death within the boundaries of the city. If the imperial court wanted to send orders to their subordinates, the warlords would have to agree to it. Therefore, when something happened, the Yun nation's response was the slowest. We will rest for a day before setting off. Be careful too, Tang Feng reminded him. Understood. After you leave, I will move to another place. The warlords here are irritable and impulsive. Who knows what they will do? If it weren't for the prosperity of this place, I wouldn't have stayed here. Now that the situation is chaotic, I have to make some preparations. You rest first. I will go exchange for some gold so that it will be easier to take away if something happens. After Gu Ziheng finished speaking, he placed the teacup on the table and pushed the door open. One day later, Gu Ziheng sent Tang Feng off. As soon as he returned to the inn, he found that it was surrounded. After discovering him, they came to greet him. Everyone, what's the matter? Gu Ziheng brought a few tall and strong subordinates with him. Most importantly, Gu Ziheng himself was at the earth will level and his subordinates were at the man will level. This made the soldiers more or less cautious. Are you merchants from Dayo? The warlord heard that you brought some rare treasures this time and wants to see them, one of the soldiers said. It's just a meeting. Is there a need for so many people? Gu Ziheng looked at the hundreds of people surrounding the inn. There were a few people standing not far away, all of whom were at the earth will level. His face was gloomy. Seeing this posture, he understood what was going on. If he still couldn't tell, he would be a fool. He was afraid that Her Majesty was at war with Great Xia. The Yun nation was also restless. This warlord felt that they were pushovers and wanted to take them down first so that he could make a windfall. The other party probably didn't just have this plan today. When Rinpoche exchanged for gold yesterday, he probably sensed their intention to leave and decided to make a move. Recently, there have been more pickpockets in the city. Her Majesty is afraid that you will encounter them with your rare treasures, so she specially asked us to escort you, the soldier said. Escort my A*S. Gu Ziheng scolded. He grabbed the soldier's chest and forcefully threw him to the side. The soldier broke through the wall and fell in. He let out a long whistle to inform the others. Courting death. Upon seeing Gu Ziheng's actions, a swordsman in a green robe who was standing not far away said coldly. He pulled out a long sword from his back, appeared above Gu Ziheng's head in a flash, and stabbed down with his sword. F***CKU. Gu Ziheng continued to scold. He dodged the long sword and forced the swordsman to retreat with a punch. He took out a handful of silver fragments and threw them out. These silver fragments didn't need to be aimed at all. They scattered as soon as they were thrown. With Rinpoche's strength, if the silver fragments were to be smashed, they would probably be seriously injured. Behind him, several of his subordinates clashed with the city guards. "Boss, catch the weapon." A few burly men jumped out of the inn and fought with the city guards. One of them threw a mace that was as tall as a human over. "Stop fighting. Pack up your things, bring the gold, and follow me to kill our way out." Gu Ziheng scolded loudly. He took the mace and swung it around in a circle. The 3 earth will experts that surrounded him were all forced to retreat. As for the city guards, they were directly plastered to the wall with blood all over their bodies. Chapter 364. Are these the mirrors and cups that the barbarians brought? A middle-aged man with a long beard was playing with a glass cup. There was a silver mirror on the table next to him. "Yes, sir. I don't quite believe that those barbarians could come up with these things," the middle-aged man said doubtfully. "They belong to Sir now." Not bad. Are there any other gains?" "There are 270,000 taels of silver. There are 17 mirrors and 42 cups like this. Send them to the treasury." The middle-aged man smiled. According to the prices that the aboriginals had been selling these things for, they were worth another 700,000 taels. In total, there was 1,000,000 taels of silver, which could be used to equip at least 20,000 soldiers. "Sir, will those barbarians take revenge?" "What's there to be afraid of? They can't even take care of themselves right now. If they are not careful, they might even destroy the country. Furthermore, the order has been given to dispatch troops within the next few days. Our city will also dispatch 10,000 soldiers." The middle-aged man waved his hand nonchalantly. With this 1,000,000 taels of silver, even if the 10,000 soldiers were to be lost, they could easily be replenished. "I see. If Great Xia and the Yun nation join forces to attack, I'm afraid those barbarians won't be able to hold on for long," the subordinate exclaimed. Boom! At night, an explosion suddenly occurred in a certain area of the Great Xia camp. Some of the surrounding tents were directly torn open. Some of the soldiers in the tents had already died in their sleep. Some of the injured were awakened from their sleep and groaned in pain after feeling the severe pain. The soldiers in the surrounding tents hurriedly ran out and helped to drag the corpses away. They then carried the injured to the casualty barracks before rushing back to their tents to get dressed and lie down. However, before they could fall asleep, they heard another explosion in the distance. However, these soldiers acted as if they hadn't heard it and went back to sleep. At first, they were nervous, but after a long time, they got used to it. Over the past few days, there would be several explosions every night. They would go out to take a look if they were nearby and pretend that they didn't hear anything if they were further away. They slept and dreamed. Wu Xinghe walked out of his tent with an ugly expression in the early morning. Wu Xinghe's expression hadn't been good for the past few days. Sullen. He had been in the army for decades and had never fought such a sullen battle. He had known for a long time that it would be difficult to fight Dayo and had even planned for it for 20 years. How many 20 years does a man have in his life? He had planned for an uncertain event for 20 years. From this, one could see his temperament. No matter how strong the ancient race was, he was prepared and confident that he would be able to obtain victory in this war. As long as time dragged on, the Aboriginals would lose all their land in the north, the Yun nation would send out their troops, the south would rebel, and Great Xia would send new recruits to the front lines. That would be the time when the Aboriginal barbarians would be chased back to the mountains. The development of the war from the beginning was indeed within his expectations. However, in the past 20 days, everything had changed. It was unknown where the other party had gotten his hands on some completely unfamiliar weapons, but they were rather powerful, especially when used against ordinary soldiers on the battlefield. A small object thrown on the side of the road that no one would notice could cause hundreds or even dozens of casualties. In the beginning, he thought that the other party did not have much and would soon run out of them. However, the other party seemed to have an endless supply of items. He used one after another, changing his style from time to time. On the battlefield, in the barracks, regardless of whether it was day or night, thunderous explosions could always be heard. Whether it was on the battlefield or when they were resting, or when they were fetching water for cooking, they would encounter such explosions from time to time. Over the past few days, everyone in the barracks was filled with tension. This was especially true during the attack. Recently, the other party would always throw a small exploding ball after the number of troops had reached a certain level. This would interrupt the subsequent attacks and then kill all the soldiers at the front lines before the reinforcements could arrive. Over the past few days, the attacks were not effective at all. The number of casualties on his side was increasing, but the casualties of the other party were decreasing. Now, every time he heard those explosions during an attack, he knew that the rhythm of the siege had been disrupted again. He no longer had the fluency that he used to have when he commanded the troops to attack. His attacking rhythm was interrupted every now and then, causing him to feel irritated and suffocated. On this battlefield, the morale of the army was getting lower and lower, which was also something that worried him. If the other party did not have those strange weapons, even if the attack was temporarily thwarted, the morale would not have dropped so quickly. But now, they had to be careful when they walked and had to look up at the sky when they attacked. Even many of the soldiers had begun to feel at a loss. The reason why he was persevering now was to at least achieve the strategic intention of this war. He had to wait for the two armies that had penetrated deep into Dayo to achieve the desired goal. At the same time, he was unwilling to admit defeat and wanted to see how many more of those strange weapons the other party had. He didn't believe that the other party would never run out of them. Wu Xinghe was in a bad mood, but Rinpoche was in a good mood. Every night, he would plant a few mines outside and fire 2 cannons at the enemy's barracks from the top of the city wall. Seeing how the great Xia soldiers would lower their heads and raise their heads every day when they went out to battle, Rinpoche felt satisfied. Especially now, the soldiers in the city almost regarded him as a god. Even though his individual strength wasn't strong, those messy weapons of his had indeed been very useful during the defense of the city. At present, there were still 80,000 great Xia soldiers who could fight outside the city. Under the situation where half of their soldiers were injured or dead, the great Xia soldiers still had no intention of retreating. Rinpoche felt that they would not give up until they saw the end of the road. The situation inside the city wasn't too good. After sending out 300 winged cavalry warriors to intercept the other party's supply team, there were still 800 winged cavalry warriors and 3,000 soldiers left in the city. There were only 3,800 soldiers in total. Some of the commoners who had participated in the defense before the Empress arrived had been mobilized to go up the city wall to assist. However, Rinpoche wasn't too worried. These commoners had been tempered by the flames of war and only lacked some military knowledge to become a new force. Whether it was in terms of strength or individual bravery, they weren't inferior to the army. In addition, there were 2 other great Xia armies wreaking havoc within the borders of Dayo. One of them only had about 80,000 soldiers. When Rinpoche first arrived in Liao City, he had already destroyed many strongholds. It wasn't until all the strongholds gathered in the city that the casualties started to decrease. However, in addition to that army, there was another 100,000 soldiers doing the same thing. After not having any gains in the wilderness, these 2 armies had already begun to attack the cities. Recently, 2 cities had already been breached. There were many casualties in the cities, but the casualties of those 2 armies weren't light either. According to Rinpoche's plan, after deploying over 3,000 soldiers to guard the city and forming a militia, it would be difficult for them to form a fighting force in a short period of time. Even if their individual strength was much higher than that of the Great Xia soldiers, they still couldn't avoid the fate of breaching the city walls. In the past few days, 3 cities had already been breached, and the casualties were no less than 40,000. It had to be said that the individual combat strength of the aboriginal commoners was enough to be proud of the fact that a group of militia and commoners caused 60,000 casualties in the face of the elite Great Xia soldiers. This was also the reason why Great Xia couldn't pursue and kill those commoners who escaped after the city was breached. The losses were too great. At the same time, 3,500 soldiers were on standby, ready to rendezvous with the reinforcements from the Protectorate of the South and give the 120,000 Great Xia soldiers a fatal blow. The reinforcements would be able to rendezvous with the 3,500 soldiers in 7 days. 85,000 against 120,000. Even if Great Xia won, the remaining soldiers wouldn't be able to do anything other than withdraw. Furthermore, Great Xia might not necessarily win. Renbochin strolled to the side hall of the city commander's residence. The 2 radio stations were there, and the other radio station had been taken away by the winged cavalry that went out to intercept the Great Xia soldiers. Any news? Renbochin went in and asked. Not yet. The Empress and Li Qianqiu's guards were in charge of the operator in the side hall. Renbochin nodded. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a rustling sound coming from the radio station. Following which, a voice said, "This is the Protectorate of the Northeast. Is Principal Ren around? Looking for me?" Renbochin was slightly puzzled. He walked back to the radio station and asked, "Yes, I am. What's the matter?" "Sir, I'm Tang Feng." The person in front of the radio station had changed. "Aren't you in Great Xia? I was still wondering if you had made it back. I didn't expect you to be in the Protectorate of the Northeast." Renbochin was telling the truth. He had really thought about the situation with the caravan, but unfortunately, it was difficult to transmit messages. At that time, he hadn't brought back the radio station. Although the Yabao could be used, it was expensive and was only used to transmit messages between cities. Later on, he could only hope that they were lucky enough to return safely with his money. Now that the supply of medicinal herbs had been cut off, the Empress was bankrupt, and her treasury was only left with the money to maintain the palace and the guards. "Sir, not only am I back, but even old Gu is back. However, he is still bedridden. I'm afraid he won't be able to wake up for at least half a month," Tang Feng said. Renbochin frowned. Old Gu was Gu Ziheng, and he should be in Yun City now. Even he had gone to the Protectorate of the Northeast. What had happened? One had to know that after the war with Great Xia, he knew that his mirror and glass cup were no longer in Great Xia. He only hoped that the Yun nation would bring him some silver taels. One had to know that without money, there would be no medicine. Without medicine, he wouldn't be able to level up. If he couldn't level up, he wouldn't be able to marry the Empress. If he couldn't marry the Empress, it would be more serious. Was he supposed to become a great sorcerer? "Sir, I didn't even bring the money back. It was robbed. I only brought back 2,000 taels of gold from Great Xia. The rest were robbed. Old Gu was slightly better than me and barely managed to escape with 5,000 taels of gold. The rest of the goods and silver were robbed by warlord Qingfeng." Renbochin's eyes widened when he heard this. He was counting on this money to train, and now it was actually robbed. The metal chain crawled out from his head, slithered to the ground, wrapped around the stool next to him, and then raised it up high. Everyone in the side hall couldn't be bothered to look at Renbochin's emoticons anymore. All of them were looking at the metal chain swaggering around the stool and exclaiming in admiration. How much was robbed? Renbochin squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. He didn't care about the money that wasn't sold, but the money that was sold was his hard-earned money. It was actually robbed. This was intolerable. About 500,000 taels. Tang Feng said a number that made everyone shudder with fear. This was 1/14 of Dao's annual income and the Empress's income for 4 years. Say it again, who robbed it? Ren Baqin gritted his teeth and asked. I escaped from Great Xiao's Juruo city, and the one who robbed it was the military there. Old Gu escaped from Yunguqing's Feng city, and the one who robbed it was the warlord of Qingfeng city. After hearing this, Ren Baqin turned around and walked away, dragging a stool behind him. The sound of the stool bumping against the ground didn't attract Ren Baqin's attention at all. Your Majesty, your money has been robbed. The Empress, who was watching a television series and eating popcorn, raised her head and was somewhat puzzled. A total of 1 million taels. Ren Baqin stretched out a finger. The Empress's eyes widened all of a sudden. It's those mirrors and glasses that I asked the caravan to bring over previously. I wanted to sell them to replenish the imperial treasury. A total of 1 million taels were robbed by the warlord of Yunguqing. Boom! The table in front of the Empress was smashed into pieces. Great Xia also robbed a portion of it. However, the Empress obviously didn't notice his last sentence. Her attention was completely attracted by the words 1 million taels to replenish the imperial treasury, and warlord of Qingfeng city. He actually dared to. The Empress's hair stood on end as she spat out each word through gritted teeth. Your Majesty, it seems like the Yun nation is going to send troops. Ren Baqin first talked about serious matters. From this incident, it could be seen that the Yun nation had already made up its mind. Otherwise, how could a warlord be so bold? The Empress calmed down after hearing this, but it was still difficult to quell the anger in her heart. She had always been the one robbing others, but today, she was actually being robbed. And it was even 1 million taels. How much could she do with 1 million taels? However, before dealing with the Yun nation, we can first send experts to deal with the warlord of Qingfeng city. This kind of person whose hands are full of the people's hard-earned money must be punished and his family property confiscated. It's too slow to deal with him after we destroy the Yun nation. 10,000 years is too long, and we can only seize every minute. Ren Baqin raised his fist and exerted force. Fighting a war is one thing, but I can't tolerate the fact that you stole my money. As for Great Xia, I'll settle this score later. After I destroy the Great Xia army, I want all the rats in the national treasury to come out with tears in their eyes. Exterminate his entire family. The Empress immediately set the tone. Chapter 365. Sir Ren, Sir Ren. Shi, who shouted a few times to wake Ren Baqin up from his daze. What's the matter? Ren Baqin turned to look at Shi, who inquisitively. Ren Baqin had been in this state for a few days. Ever since he found out that his money was gone, he had been racking his brains every day, making people wonder if he had suffered too much. Her Majesty is looking for you. Oh. Ren Baqin nodded and hurried to the main hall of the city commander's residence. Your Majesty. Sir Li. When Ren Baqin arrived, he saw the Empress eating popcorn and sharing some with Li Qinqiu. Li Qinqiu was touched. It was indeed touching that the Empress was willing to share snacks with him, which could be considered as a form of love. Sir Ren, I want to launch another night attack on the Great Xia barracks. What do you think? Li Qinqiu asked. If it was just a night attack, there would be no need to inform Ren Baqin. However, with the current manpower, how much could they gain from a night attack? His goal was naturally to get something good from Ren Baqin. Great Xia has reinforcements again. The Empress added. 40,000 elite soldiers and 30,000 commoners are rushing here with a batch of rations. They will arrive in 2 days. These reinforcements were transferred from outside Tiesua Pass in Shun City. It had to be said that the value of a radio station in this world was too great. The various regions of Deo could communicate with each other very smoothly. Just when there was a change in the other party's military strength, they could immediately detect it and make preparations before the other party arrived. I'm afraid a night attack won't be very effective. Renbochin immediately knew why Li Qincho wanted a night attack. Sir Ren, do you have any other ideas? Li Qincho asked. Let's observe the direction of the wind at night and try to poison them. Renbochin felt that it was time to throw out the 2 bottles of sarin gas. How do you do it? Li Qincho's eyes lit up. One had to know that Renbochin was most famous for using poison to kill tens of thousands of great Xia soldiers. However, he had always felt that to kill so many people, he would need a lot of poison. Renbochin might not have it on hand, so he didn't ask further. Fortunately, Renbochin could always take out some other powerful weapons, which had played a great role in defending the city these days. Now, it wasn't just Li Qincho. The winged cavalry and the soldiers from the Protectorate of the Center all looked at Renbochin as though he was a treasure chest. They felt that he always had countless rare items, and no one knew where he got them from. Other than Renbochin, Li Qincho felt that it would be Her Majesty. Airdrop. Renbochin answered immediately. The airdrop had the largest surface area, and it also evaporated quickly. The only thing that made people worry was that they were on flat plains. The surroundings were empty, so how effective it would be. Previously, it was used in valleys, such as mountain streams, where the airflow was weaker than on plains. Even so, it was only able to poison 2,000 to 3,000 great Xia soldiers to death at the White Dragon Stream, and this was when the other party was in a battle formation. Now that the Great Xia army had camped for several kilometers, it was hard to say how effective it would be in such a large area. Furthermore, there was wind on the plains, and the poisonous gas could be easily dispersed by the wind. Renbochin's target was actually a few key areas in the Great Xia barracks. It would be best if he could poison the chief commander of Great Xia to death. It was a pity that the other party's chief commander hadn't shown up for a long time. Otherwise, the Empress could directly kill him. At night, Renbochin sat in his room and fiddled with his drone. Shihu knocked on the door and said, "Sir, it's a southeast wind." "Got it." Renbochin opened the door and asked someone to take the 2 drones. He took his bag and walked out, only to meet Li Qincho waiting outside. "Sir Ren, it's all up to you this time." Li Qincho cupped his hands. As long as they used the poison to eliminate half of the soldiers outside, Liao City would still be able to defend itself. Otherwise, more than half of the soldiers would be injured, and the remaining 70,000 soldiers of Great Xia and the newly replenished 40,000 elite soldiers would be in danger. In the city, a group of people traveled north under the light of torches. Before long, they heard the Empress's voice coming from the walkie-talkie. "Are you guys ready?" "Yes, I hope there's good news." Renbochin smiled. Although this was what he said, he wasn't sure whether it would work or not. At the top of the city wall, Renbochin began to hang bottles on the drone. He used the same method as the last time. When the crane tilted, he would pull off the mouth of the bottle, and the liquid in the bottle would naturally spill down. As the drone rose up, Renbochin controlled it and flew toward the northern barracks. He went straight to the place where he had noticed a lot of guards when he used the drone to take a picture. Then, he controlled the drone to turn the crane tilt and sprinkle the liquid sarin gas down. The liquid was dispersed by the wind in the air and evaporated when it was close to the ground. Li Qincho looked at Renbochin's control with envy in his eyes. This thing was really useful. Even if it wasn't used to release poison, it could be used to check the other party's deployment during a battle. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A few patrolling Great Xia soldiers looked up and didn't care anymore. During the day, there were many people and noises, and the drone wasn't easy to detect at an altitude of 600 meters. However, in the dead of night, the sound was easier to hear. Fortunately, the sky was dark, and even if they heard it, they wouldn't be able to see it. Instead, they would think that it was some kind of mosquito. A soldier turned over in his sleep. His breathing became heavier and heavier as if he couldn't breathe. Finally, he covered his throat with his hand but couldn't make a sound. Finally, he died painfully in his sleep. Not only him, but the soldiers in the surrounding tents were also in the same state. A patrolling general had just walked into a tent when he felt that something was wrong. The posture of the soldiers in the tent was too strange. All of them were covering their throats as if they were suffocating to death. "Enemy attack," that general shouted. Soon after, he felt that he had difficulty breathing, a headache, and nausea. "Poison! Poison!" That general had a flash of inspiration. He quickly shouted, took out a ball of grass from his pocket, stuffed it into his mouth, and stumbled out of the tent. After running for dozens of meters, he fell to the ground. That general's shout alarmed many people. Many of them first rushed out of their tents with a blank look on their faces. When they felt suffocated and nauseous, they came back to their senses and took out a ball of grass from their pocket, stuffed it into their mouth, and shouted, "Enemy attack! Poison!" Before the attack, the Great Xia army was already on guard against being poisoned. After all, the entire 9 pavilions was destroyed in Great Xia, and there was a precedent where everyone in the army was poisoned to death. How could Great Xia not take precautions? Every soldier was warned about this when they were given a ball of wuma grass. At first, everyone took it to heart, but after such a long time without encountering the legendary poison that could poison thousands of people to death, these soldiers almost forgot about this matter. On this night, when they heard the shouting and saw the movements of the people around them, they hurriedly put the ball of grass into their mouths. "Great General, the statistics are done. A total of 1,700 people died, and all of them were poisoned with wuma grass. At present, there are no more casualties." Wu Xingho covered his head with one hand. If he hadn't discovered it early, he probably wouldn't have woken up. Fortunately, the other party's poisoning had been discovered. At this moment, hearing about the losses made him feel more at ease. This is their last resort, right? Wu Xingho snorted. Since they had already used poison, the other party probably didn't have any other tricks up their sleeves. "Inform everyone to stop fighting tomorrow and continue attacking the city the day after tomorrow," Wu Xingho instructed. At the same time, a long cry came from his stomach, causing his facial expression to change. Chapter 366. Renbachyan looked at the photos taken by the drone, and his first reaction was that it was spectacular. It wasn't common to see tens of thousands of people suffering from diarrhea. Renbachyan could smell it just from the photos. Then, his face turned ugly. It was obvious that the poisonous gas from last night didn't have much of an impact on the Great Xia army. After all, there were 2 bottles of sarin gas, but other than seeing a large number of soldiers squatting in the wilderness with diarrhea, there weren't any corpses. He only saw a batch of corpses being buried outside the northern barracks. With just a glance, he knew that the number was much lower than expected. Combined with the fact that the entire northern barracks were suffering from diarrhea, Renbachyan had a bad guess. Did the other party find a way to cure the poison? Otherwise, even if the effect of the poisonous gas wasn't good, it could be explained by the wind. How could the tens of thousands of Great Xia soldiers suffering from diarrhea be explained? Unless the other party used some kind of drug that had mild side effects, it was impossible for tens of thousands of soldiers to suffer from diarrhea. Most importantly, he didn't see any panic in the northern barracks, which meant that his expectations had been dashed yesterday. The other party's commander was fine. Otherwise, the northern barracks wouldn't have done nothing besides suffer from diarrhea. If you attack now, the effect might be better than a night attack, Renbochin said to Li Qianqiu with a slight frown. This was just a casual remark. The northern barracks were suffering from diarrhea, but the other two barracks were fine. If the other two battalions were to make dumplings out of the dumplings after they left, then this little bit of manpower would be used up. After placing the drone and the base station in the room, Renbochin took out the two mortars. Bring 6 artillery shells, Renbochin instructed Shihu. Now, there were only 30 artillery shells left. Renbochin had already been meticulous about using them as little as possible and only using them when they were needed. However, seeing that the northern barracks were squatting peacefully, Renbochin felt that he needed to discuss them a little. The people in this world were actually very particular about using the toilet. In the barracks, there would be a public toilet at regular intervals. There weren't any tents near the toilets, and it was completely open space. There were at least hundreds of such toilets in the Great Xia barracks. Now, tens of thousands of soldiers were squeezed outside these hundreds of toilets, and there were dozens of people waiting outside each toilet. Renbochin's target was to randomly select a few within the range of the mortars. Then, he adjusted the angle and inserted the artillery shells. Bang! Everyone in the Great Xia barracks was on the verge of collapsing from diarrhea. Even though the accompanying military doctors had brought along some medicine to treat diarrhea, they weren't prepared to treat tens of thousands of people. Yesterday, everyone was worried that they would be poisoned. Many people chewed the wuma grass and ate it, which made the diarrhea even worse. Many people had tightened their legs as soon as they walked out of the toilet, and they lined up outside while cursing. From time to time, he would hear curses like, "I'm going to shit my pants, hurry up and come out." Just as a group of people were anxiously waiting for the toilet, a tragedy happened. 2 black dots fell from the sky with a piercing sound. Everyone was busy clamping their legs together, so no one noticed it at all. Boom! Boom! The scene was too spectacular to be described in words. In 2 different places in the Great Xia barracks, the sea and the sky were the same color. Huang Hai! The faces of the people who rushed over after the explosion twitched. Boom! Boom! It was another yellow sea. After the 6 shells were fired, 4 out of 6 hit the target. After the bombardment ended, everyone in Great Xia was furious. It was fine if they attacked during normal times, but they attacked today and specifically at these few places. 4 out of 6 shells hit the toilet. Even a fool wouldn't believe that the other party didn't do it on purpose. A group of people scolded Renbochin for being immoral, too immoral. When Wu Xingho, who was in the military tent, heard this result, his face twitched for a long time. Finally, his forehead twitched as he said, "They only have this little trick up their sleeves. In my opinion, they are already at their wits' end. Now, all they have to do is wait for the reinforcements to arrive tomorrow to break through Liao's city in one fell swoop." After Renbochin finished firing, he felt much better. In this world, there shouldn't be anything more comforting than blowing up the toilet while the enemy was queuing up to use the toilet. Renbochin praised himself for being quick-witted. Then, he began to consider the plan that he had been thinking about for the past few days. Since Great Xia had a lot of soldiers, he would get rid of their commander. Since he didn't know where the commander was, he would let him expose his position. Or, he could think of a way to send the bombs to his side. As for how to do it, when Renbochin returned to Earth, he gave Yangsan a call and said, "Make me a bomb that doesn't weigh more than 320 kilograms. There must be 100 to 150 kilograms of Class B explosives in it. Besides the outer shell, the rest should be steel balls. It would be better if it's steel nails. I want it in 3 days." Impossible. 3 days is definitely not enough. I can ask for instructions and give you a batch of conventional equipment like grenades or mines. Boss still owes me a few conditions. Renbochin immediately used his trump card. Conditions were only considered conditions when they were spoken out. Just like money, it was only money when it was spent. After these conditions were used up, he would just have to get 2 better secret manuals in exchange for a few more conditions. Let me ask first. Yang Sen immediately hung up and went to ask for instructions. After 20 minutes, he called again and said, although it's very difficult, I believe that with the technology and manufacturing capabilities of our military unit, we will definitely be able to make it. Make the outer shell according to me. It's best if it's the same proportion as a human or a little bigger. Yang Sen was slightly stunned. He had never seen or heard of anyone who wanted to make a bomb with a custom-made outer shell. Was this the so-called self-detonation? Get someone to your department. I'm going over now. Renbochin hung up the phone and headed straight for Shanghai. When he arrived at the Messier 87 building and saw Yang Sen, Renbochin put forward his requirements. That bomb has to be detonated by remote control, and there must be a listening device inside. Give me a set of listening devices that must be able to receive signals within 5 kilometers. At the same time, there must be a walkie-talkie and a loudspeaker inside, preferably at the head position. The outer shell of the bomb has to be the same as mine, and the hair has to be longer like this. As for the style of the clothes, I'll draw it for you. Renbochin's plan was to make a humanoid bomb that looked exactly like the 7th prince. With a statue of the 7th prince, the other party couldn't possibly suspect that it was a bomb, right? Then, he would use some methods to arouse the enemy's interest, wait for them to bring the bomb back, and detonate it right next to the commander. This would be the so-called express delivery bomb. More than 100 kilograms of Class B explosives. One had to know that a grenade contained no more than 50 grams of TNT. 1 kilogram of TNT could make 20 grenades, and 100 kilograms could make 2,000 grenades. Class B explosives were a mixture of RDX and TNT, and were more powerful than TNT. When 2,000 to 3,000 grenades were bundled together and exploded at the same time, the speed of the explosion was close to 8,000 meters per second. The shock wave and the shrapnel inside, as long as the enemy commander was within 30 meters of the bomb, even a peak earth will expert would be turned into a mosaic. As long as the enemy commander was within 10 meters of the bomb, even a spirit will expert. Renbochin thought about it and felt that it should be able to kill a spirit will expert, right? After all, he didn't know much about spirit will experts. From what he heard and understood, it was really hard to say. After all, an intermediate earth will expert could cut bullets with a knife. This wasn't the first time he encountered such a situation with an anti-aircraft machine gun. He completely relied on the firing speed and power of the anti-aircraft machine gun to smash the enemy into pieces. Above the intermediate Earth wheel was the advanced level, and above that was the Earth embryo realm. Above that, one had to break through the heavenly gate to become a spirit will expert. Spirit will experts were also divided into various grades. As such, he wasn't very confident. However, even if the bomb couldn't kill the enemy, it definitely wouldn't be a problem to seriously injure them. Renbochin was slightly distracted. When he came back to his senses and finished drawing on the paper, he slammed the table and said, "This is the style of the clothes." Yang Sen looked at the thing on the paper and was speechless. 3 words appeared in his mind. What is this? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.